9:45, and we are going to call the EWEB regular session to order. April 4th. First of all, the facility and safety awareness briefing, meeting logistics. 3-0. Thank you for attending this evening's board meeting. EWEB management and subject matter experts are here with us in the room and virtually. During tonight's presentation, remote presenters will appear on the screen. Please make sure to speak loudly and clearly so everyone can hear you. Guests are invited to sign up at the table at the back of the room if they wish to provide public testimony. Visitor access is limited to the board meeting room and the restrooms. Restrooms are located on the first floor through the exit to the right-hand door over here in front of the room. In case of an emergency, such as a fire alarm, exit through the glass door at the back of the room unless it is not safe to do so. The alternate emergency exit is located at the rear of the building just beyond the restrooms through the store. During an evacuation, follow staff's instructions and stay together for safety. Tonight's meeting will be recorded. The recording named of the meeting is called to order. It is currently recorded and will continue until adjournment. The meeting room will be muted during the break. Aside from that period, virtual participants on the screen and public audience will be able to hear conversations in the room until the meeting is disconnected. First up, we have an agenda check. Anything? No? Okay. Seeing none there, we will move on to items from board members and the general manager. Would anybody like to start? Okay.
Thank you. Two items real quickly. Yesterday, Matt and I attended a presentation by staff on all the customer products we have and everything. And it was very, very informative, very good time spent. And I need to apologize to the staff because I left and didn't acknowledge how good it was. I was in kind of a little and so good job. Thank you very much. And I really appreciated what you did. And it was very, very informative. Second thing, today I met with Dave Willis with Sub. We met for an hour just talking about watershed issues and things like that. I gave him a copy of our report. He was incredibly impressed with it. He's going to look at all the points of it, and he learned a ton. I just, just some of the high points about some of the things in there. So starting that dialogue, and hopefully it'll work into something more. Thank you.
Just that Sonia and I attended a meeting yesterday on customer. I don't know what it's called, but anyway, and just wanted to thank staff because it was very thorough and it was a good one.
I went to.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, and then I just wanted to make sure everybody knew the ethics filing period. It ends on the 15th. So just a note there. And then many of us attended a meeting at the state capitol earlier in March, which was also a great event. We're going to go and advocate for issues for EWEB. Appreciated staff putting that together, and then all the partners for going up there. And thanks also to staff for the meeting yesterday on the customer products and our efficiency programs. Okay, me, Frank.
Don't have anything this evening.
Okay, great. We'll move on to public input. So I have two people signed up. First, I have Sandra Bishop, and second, I have Mark Rabinowitz. I will read the preamble here on public input, and then we'll pop it up to the table right here. When your name is called, please come forward and clearly state your name and optionally your address or ward. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present their testimony. Please keep track of time by watching the timer at the front of the room or by listening for an audio notification when 3 minutes has elapsed. If you are a participant, we don't have anybody participating by phone, so I'll skip that. After all testimony is heard, each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose, although by policy we do not engage in a back and forth dialogue. Please note the failure of a commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. If the question is presented by a speaker and the board does not provide an answer, an EWEB staff member will contact the speaker if the question can be addressed at a later time. Okay. And with that, I will call Sandra Bishop up to the podium or table.
I guess I don't need a timer since I can actually.
First one right here.
Yeah, see it all.
Good evening. My name is Sandra Bishop. My husband and I live at the end of Hilliard Street off of 40th at the easternmost edge of the EWEB water reservoir construction project at 40th and Patterson. And last week, a media article came out stating that EWEB was fencing off more of the site to create a 100-foot safety barrier that was needed around the reservoirs for the next phase of the construction, wrapping the concrete structures with wires under high tension. Alarmingly, since 100 feet away from the easternmost reservoir is the middle of our kitchen, I was a bit concerned. And so then shortly after we received word that there would be some kind of hard barrier that would be put up between our house and the construction site for that next phase. So fast forward a few days, and what appeared last Friday or day or so before were some cargo containers that were placed about 15 feet away from our house between us and the reservoir. The problem was that they were not stacked or placed in a way that would make you feel comfortable. They were very precariously perched where they were. So did the commissioners receive the email that I sent to the staff and asked me for the commissioners? So you saw the photographs of the pictures and the way they were stacked. Okay, great. That'll save me a whole bunch of time here. So basically, I'm here today to go on record once more as to notify you or try to get you to not do this again anywhere else on any other project. As a governing body of this utility, you've created a very dangerous situation with the siting those gargantuan concrete reservoirs so close to existing houses with 10.74 acres. There's no reason there couldn't have been a better siting. So I'm also here today as a realist to say, you know, it's happening and been in it for 2 years. I really want to thank the contractors and the EWEB project manager who have responded very quickly and very solidly to these concerns. And that's the main thing to say. It's very concerning that it takes a news media person showing up or an ordinary citizen to come up with some of these issues. It should have been anticipated before, but we really appreciate how the contractors are handling it. We haven't had any problems there at all. So thank you very much. Next time I won't wear a jacket with noisy zippers on it. Thank you very much.
All right, Mark Rabinowitz.
On February 13, EWEB's lobbyist Jason Huser testified to the State House officially in favor of new nuclear reactors in Oregon. House Bill 2215 would overturn the 1980 ballot measure, which prohibited new reactors until a national nuclear dump was built. EWEB's testimony ignored the purpose of the bill, which would overturn a democratic citizen initiative, and instead parroted nuclear industry propaganda about reactors supposedly being carbon-free and safe. Oregon had a small uranium mine and mill near Lakeview that is now a de facto permanent nuclear dump. There is no way to make this safe except through the passage of time, lots of it. It is worth noting that in Oregon, in the US, peak electricity has happened. It was 2018 in terms of gigawatt hours. Electric generation since 2007 has been propped up in large part by natural gas. And since conventional natural gas peaked a half century ago, dropping 2/3 cents, this means that the largest energy source in the US for electric power is fracked gas. And this is true for the whole country and for WEC. And I assume everyone here knows what WECC is. I would have thought that the mess at Hanford, the country's most polluted place, and the financial disaster of the Whoops reactors would have deterred Northwest Utilities from considering more nuclear waste generation. A half century ago, EWEB wanted to build a reactor on the coast in the tsunami zone before the subduction zone was known, but after the dangers of radioactivity and meltdowns were well understood. EWEB finally conceded after years it was a dumb idea. I realize fossil energy depletion and its implications have quietly scared a lot of government planners, but new nukes won't sustain the unsustainable. We need hyper conservation, efficiency, maximum insulation. Why is it legal to light up billboards at night? And we need radical honesty about our predicament as we approach the end of the fossil fuel era due to depletion. All complex systems need to consider malfunction, accidental or deliberate. Reactors have the potential to render entire regions uninhabitable. Seeing EWEB's recent stacking of poorly secured containers at the water tanks on wooden boards, which is just unbelievable, reminded me of the 1975 accident at TVA's Browns Ferry reactor in Alabama, where technicians were looking for a draft using candles and set the control cables on fire. And the flames raged for hours, and there was almost a meltdown in Alabama because someone used a candle on $1 billion reactor. So please think about the future.
Okay, that's it. All right, we will close the public session, public hearing, and we will move on to commissioner comments. Otherwise, I have. Okay, well, thank you very much for your testimony this evening. I do see that I got an email forwarded, but it didn't have photos. Do you have the photos, Ann, that were in the original email that Sandra Bishop sent? I'd love to see them. I don't see them attached to the forwarding of this.
So I'd just like to say that
We don't engage in a
that
back
no
and forth.
longer exists. That no longer exists. So you're going to see something in the past, and now there are
Understood.
6
Okay,
containers stacked like they are connected.
got it. Thank you. Okay. All right, and Mark, thank you for your testimony, and otherwise, we will move on to the next session.
I'll just say, Sandra and Mark, thank you for testifying. Sandra, I can assure you that within 7 minutes of the receipt of those pictures, the general manager had it, and he had responded with safety concerns and addressed it within 7 minutes. And so the system worked. Nobody's perfect. We didn't do that. Our contractor did that. And to me, the system worked. And thank you for acknowledging that the system worked. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And whether or not, I'm not an engineer. I don't know if that was safe or not. I see that all the time. But, and it doesn't concern me, but it concerned you, and we addressed your concerns. So thank you for coming and acknowledging that, that we did what was right.
Next up, we will move on to board action items and general business. First up, we have approval of the consent calendar. Would anybody like to pull anything first?
I would like to pull item 4 of consent calendar A.
Okay, anyone else? Okay.
Move to adopt consent calendar A, absent item 4.
Thank you. Second? Second. All right. Thank you. All right. All those in, well, any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. All right,
Yeah, the reason I pulled that one is I sent a question in Friday or whatever. This has to do with Pacific excavation and concrete removal and replacement. And I just wanted to bring it to the attention that anytime that there's an opportunity for us to look at using a lower carbon intense concrete in our buying process, if we could think about putting that into the RFPs as a plus mark, not saying that we have to do it if it meets specs. And the only reason I'm saying this is because if nobody starts doing this, acquiring it. None of the local contractors are going to start looking into lower carbon intense concrete. And so EWEB as a user, a fairly significant user of concrete, if we can get on board, if the city of Eugene could get on board, if the university could get on board, that may help to bring this product into our market. So I don't have any problem with this contract. It just was an opportunity to say, looking forward in our RFP processes, if we can say that we favor using low carbon concrete as opposed to conventional concrete, that would be maybe a plus check when looking at our RFPs. That's all. I wanted to bring it up.
Thank you. John Brown?
Could I maybe offer a friendly comment to that or whatever? Could we know the cost differential between the low carbon and the traditional concrete? Because I know that LTD made some recent decisions, and the city did, like in the farmer's market and LTD's, MX lanes, they put in basically a landing strip with, 9 inches of concrete and all the rebar. But the low carbon concrete is so expensive that it's prohibitive. And so I would like to know the cost differential if we're going to solicit that. If we say low carbon, bid at low carbon and bid at regular carbon, I'd like to know that cost differential so we could know what we're paying for. I mean, how much more it's costing us.
Yeah, I would absolutely be, that would be part of the equation, definitely.
Thanks.
Okay, Frank?
Yeah, President Carlson, certainly I think there's an opportunity that we want to explore here. There's a few things that we would like to use as part of our approach. One of them is I have asked our procurement group to take a look at an estimate of how much concrete we use on an annual basis so we can get a feel for the impact. The second thing is we have to look at this from an engineering perspective. The low carbon concrete does have some differences in its performance from standard concrete. Some of that is actually very favorable, and others such as cure time can be affected as well. So we do want to understand those differences, engineer that, to your point, Commissioner, into the procurement process, and then we can understand what our relationship could be with some partners. I don't think this is something we want to go alone, but understand the partnership opportunity, and then I'll call it a green premium, if you want to use that term, to see what the difference is and how that affects our projects. So we want to take a sort of intentional approach to this. It is something that we're starting to take a look at. So I think that's consistent with both commissioners' request here.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up. It was just an opportunity, spending $700,000 to buy to tear up and replace concrete. It seemed like a good conversation starter. So thank you for that.
And right now, just to follow on, there's 3 organizations that we know of that produce this type of concrete. None of them are near Eugene. Sorry, there's I think maybe 2 in Oregon.
Yeah.
3 in Oregon. 2 up by Portland and 1 just north of Bend. We also have to check on the supply of the replacement products that replace the actual cement portion, which is where the carbon intensity comes in. So we're agreeing. We're just saying we want to take a intentional approach to it.
Absolutely. I would move to approve item 4.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to approval of consent calendar B. Do we have anything to
Move to
pull?
adopt consent calendar B.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I didn't hear Dombrowski.
Aye.
Okay. I want to make sure. Didn't want to miss it. Okay, all right, thank you. Next up, we have the prior year-end audited financial statements and management letter. The riveting document. We appreciate it, but very well.
It's never our goal to bring you a riveting audit report.
Riveted.
Good evening, commissioners. I have with me tonight Rob Freytag. He's our new general accounting supervisor. I think I introduced him last month. And Matthew as well was the lead analyst who supported this work. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie Desmoni. Are you there, Julie?
I am. Thank you very much. Perfect. Can you hear? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm here today with Sydney Jacoby. Sydney is the audit senior on the engagement. So that is really auditor speak for the one that did the vast majority of the work. I get to take credit for the work for that. So I'm pleased to report to you tonight the results of the audit of the Eugene Water and Electric Board 2022 financial statement audit. Next slide, please. Perfect. So I want to introduce a few of the engagement team members tonight, some nature of the services that we provided. We're going to start with having a conversation or having a presentation, but then we will open it to any questions that you do have. Talk about some of our significant audit areas, our opinions, how we came down the pipe and what we finished up on, and some required communications. Next slide, please. So these are just a couple of your team members or some of your key team members during this year's audit. One thing I would like to point out, you've seen my face before, you've probably seen Keith's face before. We do have a new concurring reviewer. So one of our QC requirements is that we change this over, the engagement reviewers, making sure that there's new and fresh perspectives on an annual basis. So Laurel is our new, she's a senior manager in our group. She's been with us for almost a decade or a little over a decade, has been working in the power and utilities space for that long. She has not worked on this engagement before, and this was her first year as our concurring reviewer as a part of that role. Sydney's been on the role a couple of years. She did move into a more senior leadership position this year. And then we had a whole smattering of other staff, both new and existing individuals on the engagement. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the nature of the services that we provided. Number one, we provided the independent auditor's report on the individual and combined statements of EWEB. Second, we did assist with the financial statements. However, it's really important to note the financial statements were drafted by management. And they were in its complete form. We help with some of the word processing at the very end, but ultimately they are drafted by management. We also have a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. This is linked to your single audit or your uniform grant guidance audit. That's a required report. We also, as we've done in years past and are required to do in years future, because you are a municipal entity within the state of Oregon, you are required to have a report on the minimum standards of audits. This adds about 12 different compliance requirements that we have to look at and report to the state board. Finally, or I guess almost finally, the fifth thing that we will also report on, or we have reported on, is your audit report on the federal programs. So this is due to your FEMA filings. And that report will be going to the Federal Clearinghouse. And then finally, we have what is tonight. We've included a letter to those charged with governance that has more words than we wanted to say tonight. But that letter, along with this presentation, is our final report to you as those charged with governance or the board of directors. Next slide, please. Perfect. So these are just some of our important areas. This does not encompass everything that we do on an audit context, but these are some of the areas that we spend the majority or quite a bit of our time in, both work orders, classification, and how work orders handled. This is the biggest flow of information and flow of dollars that are coming out of the utility, other than power costs. IT and security and access is something that we've elevated through the last several years. So it's very important. You know, we used to really worry about security into buildings. Now what we're looking at is security, IT security. Single audit over FEMA and federal funds, that's something very important. We needed to ensure that we had consistent application of internal controls and with compliance over federal laws, regulations, and of the Oregon minimum standards. Next slide, please. So this is the happy part of the presentation. This is where we get to report on what we found during the course of the audit. We did find on your financial statements once again this year an unmodified opinion on those financial statements. There were some significant standards that were implemented during this year. We're pleased to report that we had no material modifications to your financial reporting. We did not find any findings both in the government auditing standards report, the Oregon minimum audit standards report, or the single audit or uniform grant guidance report. So that is exactly what your counterparties want to see. It's what your constituents want to see. It's what the federal agencies that are doing work with you want to see. I'm going to turn it over to Sydney to finish up the presentation.
Thanks, Julie. Below is a list of our required communications to you, as mentioned before. So the first one is our responsibility under auditing standards. We are responsible for forming an opinion and expressing an opinion about whether the financial statements have been prepared by management with your oversight in all material respects. You can see that specifically in our audit report. We also are required to communicate to you our views on significant accounting policies and management's judgments and accounting estimates, which are the aspects that you have significant practices and within the financial statement disclosures. You will also see that in our audit report and in the financial statements. We had no audit adjustments this year that we either proposed to management and they passed on, or actual adjustments, so that's great. We also were required to communicate to you any of management's consultations with other accountants, which there are none. And then any disagreements with management, we are also required to communicate, which we also had none this year, which is great. And then we had no difficulties in performing the audit, as always. Next slide, please. Awesome. And then finally, we want to thank EWEB and the entire team there. We know a lot of work goes into getting us all of our requests that we need, and in a timely fashion, and then turning around the financial statements in a timely fashion too, is a lot of work. And so we want to thank the team for that. Everything, as always, goes according to our audit plan that we set out in the beginning of the audit, because the team is always very organized and put together. So it allows us to get in, get our work done, ask our questions efficiently, and then issue the financial statements a couple weeks after field work.
I will also say that one of the things that we always encourage in our audit process, and happens at EWEB you can go to the next slide, on a consistent basis, is just the year-round conversation. So we don't wait. When the new leasing standard, I think we've been talking about the standard, Deborah, made what, 3-4 years? It's been out for about 18, so it's an interesting standard to finally get to do. But it's been interesting, as things come up during the year, we have the constant conversations. We want to have that type of relationship with our auditees because we want to make sure that the board has the right information as you go on through the year. So having the conversation about new standards, about changes in practices is important to have throughout the continuous year. So I want you to know that that does occur consistently. So we're here to answer any questions on either the financial statements, on this presentation, on the letter to those charged with governance, any questions that you might have on the audit process this year. And it does say Keith is here. I apologize. We had to split up due to board meetings all being at the same time. So we got the fun end of the straw. So we got to be here with you tonight.
Thank you. Questions?
Number one, Julie and your staff, thank you very much. I think this is like the 17th one of these I've got to sit through. And it's not always been this good. And hats off to staff and management for making sure that we got through this without any problems, because there have been some challenges in the past. And that leads me to the next question, is that I know a while ago you came up with problems with WAM. When we first implemented that new system and we had audit problems and everything else. And I don't see that now, but I see that WAM is antiquated and we're getting rid of it. So I'm kind of, I'm wondering if we've got a system that's not working or not functional anymore, how is it still performing?
Well, I would say that, when you look at financial controls and you look at the financial statements, it's not just the system that does everything. It's how much interaction do the humans have to have with the system to get the results that you want from an audit process. So it's not, there's a lot of systems out there that will run so much more efficiently and can bring the data to where the humans don't have to do a lot of patching or a lot of work on the back end. To get to where we want from a financial result. So it's not, when you look at these numbers that are spit out, there's a lot of human interaction within them. So new systems are always something that is trying to be more efficient as far as, how does data come in? What's the construct of the data? How is the security of the data? And it's an important thing to think about as you're coming through. So you can have, I've seen some of the most, actually, I'll give you an example. I'm working on one right now. Can't tell you who the client is, but I am working on one right now that their system has been established since 1987. It is the most antiquated. Some of the things that they have to do to even get through the day are just, you would blow your mind of what has to happen because of the system. And so then the humans have to take the big load onto their shoulders and still get a clean audit opinion. So I hope that described it a little bit, but the dual effort.
Oh, you did a good job. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, staff. So what I heard was this was a clean audit, nothing to jump up and down about. But what would a 200-page document be if there weren't a few questions that has to be addressed? If you write a 200-page report and nobody reads it, that doesn't make a sound. And these are on the financials. On page 36, we're talking about management discussion and analysis, and something jumped out to me. It was the Lieberg process, and it was termed very eloquently. It said extraordinary item of $19.8 million. I'm just wondering, is that negative 19.8 million? Is that what we're not getting in generation dollars, or is that? And we can get back. You can get back to me on these.
Oh, Deborah, do you want to take the first stab at that, and then maybe we can talk about our audit procedures, what we did around it?
5 people here, we're all talking about who's going to take a stab at that. Matthew, do you want to talk about what that entry represents?
Sure. So that's the net book value, excuse me, of the assets that we are writing off. So once we made the decision to no longer generate, those assets are basically useless. And anything that was specific to the powerhouse or generation, we wrote off at the end of it.
Does that include the income generating or not? Just hard assets. That was one of the questions. And
yeah.
Then the next, go ahead.
Did you have something to add, Julie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so there's a ton of evaluations from a book perspective that we have to look at when this type of thing happens, both from an asset retirement cost standpoint, from an impairment standpoint, from a loss generation. And that loss generation or the dollars, that's a future operating revenue. So that doesn't actually come into this number. What this truly is that evaluation of the impairment. I think the one thing that's important for the board to understand is that when we talk impairment from a financial statement standpoint, it's a one-way street. So we're very careful with impairment as well, because once you write it off, even if you bring it back up to doing something with the asset, you can never bring it back on your books. And that's just the way the standards are written. And so we have to follow the law, the standard, even if it maybe doesn't always make practical sense. So this is the assessment that we've been doing or working out with management, and have had a significant amount of conversations and testing around where we're at from an impairment standpoint at this point in time, as of December 31st.
That would be a depreciated value then, right?
Yeah, it's the net book value. So yeah, what was left on after depreciation had already been taken against it through the years.
Okay. My time ran out. Can I ask another question?
I think that was. Turn it off. Okay, I was gonna say that's not, you're fine.
Okay, next one, we're going to our investment income. I know we all had a lovely year in 2022 on investments. This is on page 59 and it has to do net increase or decrease in fair market value of our investments. 2021, we had an increase of 1.5 million. This year, we had a decrease of $3.7 million. I'm just wondering if that loss is going to require us to backfill some of those investments. I'm thinking of the PERS account. If those were investments that were PERS related, does it look like we're going to need to backfill those to make our requirements?
So that value is not related to our PERS liability.
Okay.
And so we will see a PERS report and understand what the impact of 2022 was on PERS investments.
All right, thank you. Those were just a couple of things that stood out. Thank you.
I do think that too, it's important to note that those numbers that you're writing it to, some of it's realized, but there's a lot of it that's unrealized. You're still holding those investments that have value. We just have to, as of 11:59 and 59 seconds on December 31st, we take a snapshot of what that looks like and have to record that value. And obviously that changes every day. And hopefully we'll continue to grow.
Thank you.
A quick follow-on question to the PERS question. There was a section in there where it talked about the inferred payments to that. Are we going to see, when do we get the updated PERS report? When do we need to pay more in, or do we not need to pay more in? What's the timing of that?
We will, what month do we see that, Aaron? Very soon.
I was going to say usually it's April.
I wanted to say it was like September, October, when we run valuation figures. It's effective July 1, every biennium, that our rates change. But I believe we get valuation information in the fall. Julie, you probably know this stuff as well in terms of the timing on when PERS info comes out, but yeah.
Yeah, the funding request or the funding, not request, it's not really a request. The funding responsibility will be coming out here in the next, we think 30 days with the July 1st start. That's how much code cash they're going to draw away from you. And then the actual actuarial report that shows all these numbers and resets all these obligations and deferred inflows and outflows comes out generally in September. They've been getting a little bit quicker through the years, but not, it's going to wait till then.
Great, thank you for that. Otherwise, thank you so much for the excellent report. And right, it was not riveting in that. It was riveting in the fact that I had to look in multiple different places to find that key information, no findings. Not used to that. Usually there's one pager either at the very beginning or the very end, but it seemed like this report had it kind of scattered throughout, which required some more searching, which is probably for the best. Thank you again.
We'll highlight it next year.
All right. Oh, Frank.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank the members of Moss Adams and staff, but also there's a lot of internal staff that work within the systems that we have, and including our work and asset management systems. I did have the opportunity to sit down with Sydney and Keith and talk about not just where we were today, but also how we're viewing some of the risks going forward. I do think that it's an area that we're going to lean into Moss Adams going forward in more of the partnership that we have with them as we get into changing out our customer information system and our financial systems. I think these are, as Julie mentioned, these are areas where there's a touch point between sort of human interaction, internal controls, and the systems of which we have to be accountable to. And so I think that's an area over the next year to 2 years to pay particularly close attention to, not just you as governance, but certainly staff and Moss Adams. It's one of the things that I think we need to make sure is pretty evident on our radars. And so WAM, the replacement of WAM will follow after that, but there are a lot of financial ties between all these different systems. It's why we chose to do the financial system and the customer information system first and do them together. And so really, look forward to the partnership with Moss Adams there. Yeah, I really appreciate their work and the opportunity to have an unexciting audit, which is the best kind of audit you could ever have. And as Julie knows, and some others in the room know, it hasn't always been that way in the past. And so I'm glad that it's a boring one, actually.
So to add on to Frank's comments and to also circle back, Moss Adams is a partner of ours year round. We do consider them to be a valuable resource. To Frank's point, we are undertaking a very large IT project this year, and we've already started those conversations. We will have QA resources on this project that will be in contact with Moss Adams throughout the year to ensure that we have the documentation that they need to properly audit after our cutover. And so those are really ongoing. And then I wanted to thank the team. There's people in the back of this room, us up here, and people at home who all supported this. And then just around the utility, this is only really possible because people are closing their work orders. They're following our internal controls. So it was a group effort, and I appreciate everyone's work on it.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have the CBC liaison agenda conversation. Okay. Well, I can kind of hit this off a little bit. We end up needing to move the meeting out a couple of weeks due to the mayor not being available at the time we originally scheduled. So I think it's now scheduled out for the 12th. And we just thought, in light of the conversations that we all had around our efficiency programs, we wanted to revisit some of the ask there, if it really makes sense, or if there are other kind of items that we want to bring up with the city. We did at the last meeting, we had a list of items that we said we wanted to talk about, but we just wanted to, given that we've moved the time out and we have this other information, kind of revisit if there's anything else we want to bring to the city.
What about enhancing the availability of EV charges in areas where there could be like parking structures? People that the whole center, or they go downtown to the DAC, or they go different places. That's ample time to get sufficient charge, although it's not, off differentiate in that, but about bringing that topic up. Doing something about that.
I'm smiling at Mindy because yesterday in our meeting with the customer care folks, we actually kind of talked a little bit about that. So,
What would that mean? Do you want us to ask them if we can put the meters in, if they want to put them in? I guess that would be my question.
One of the things that we talked about in our meeting yesterday is that we have the infrastructure and all of that, but we don't have the staff to maintain them. And that's kind of a problem, is that there's so many of these public charging stations that are like, they're not working or whatever. Maybe some partnership with the city where, I'm not sure about who pays for what, but that they have staff that could make sure that they're working hard. Like they would be in charge of that portion of it. And that, whatever we charge for the electricity, they could add on a little bit extra so that it could, it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but it could be something little self-funded.
Frank?
I think Commissioner Borowski's question is a good one for the city to potentially answer. I think if we have a goal to facilitate the expansion of EV charging, a question to them would be, how can you help facilitate this? It could be through different types of codes, different ordinance that would facilitate that, make it an easier, maybe easier access to infrastructure, kind of lower the barriers of doing that. I'm not sure about the city's capability to bring resources to it, financial or otherwise. But I think the question is a good one to ask them. If EV charging is something we would like to facilitate more of, and we have some potential to participate in that, because I think we do, how can the city help to encourage and facilitate that from their end? And it could be policy related, it could be ordinance related, it could be a number of different things. But I think that's a really good question to ask the city. If we want to do this and we want to partner, what can you bring to the table?
And to add on to that, I'd love to see, some additional places that are scattered more around, strategic areas where they already have parking there. If we could add a charging station onto it, and maybe we charge the premium. I don't know. I mean, if they're willing to put the space in, there's already a parking meter there. Could we put something next to it for charging so that we could utilize that space? We can sell the power. And then we expand, the capabilities within the region. Okay, Ben?
I guess I would just take the same question and broaden it a little bit, because I think there are a whole host of ways in which the city on electrification of transportation, just broadening it that way so that charging is in there, but we're not figure out what's the best place for different chargings and different levels of chargers to go, but encourage the group, the CDG, to narrow in on where those that'll go.
Another thing for the potential agenda, I do know that, then this may simply be a thank you depending on the outcome, but I know that we are scheduled, we are on the agenda regarding our request of the city to approve our pursuit of a bond issuance, and that's scheduled for April 10th.
April 10th.
So a couple days ahead of time. So we may be in a position to thank them for passing that through. So something else to put on the agenda list.
And I don't know if you've already talked with them about this, maybe not because you haven't met with them so far yet, but just the College Hill Reservoir. What's that process will look like, just to give them a heads up. I know that the counselors who are on this little committee changes, so some people just might have more than others.
I did meet with one of the city councilors. They had some questions about dam safety. Apparently, one of the things that's coming up with quite a bit of concerns about the Cascadia subductions of an earthquake and dams break, and then they flood the town, and they've been talking quite a bit about that. And I think there's some confusion about the dams that EWEB owns versus dams that are in, the larger dams that are upriver anyway, and what that looks like. So that might be some information that we could share. I don't know if it has to be during this conversation, but I am curious in what context it's coming up in the city council meetings, that would even be a concern. But perhaps there's some information that we could share with them, maybe especially some of the newer counselors who this is all new information to them.
I do believe, and I think we'll follow up as an action item. There's definitely a piece of summary information we could bring relative to Carmen Smith, which is a high hazard facility. Leeburg is not for flood control, and so it probably is irrelevant in the conversation. But I do believe we have an overview sheet on dam safety as it relates to Carmen Smith. Most of the inundation maps do not deal with our facilities. They deal with federal facilities that are specific for flood control, but be happy to supply what we can to the city.
Okay, yeah, if we have anything that kind of delineates, this is our section and this is what would happen with their section.
what do you guys feel about us bringing up the climate guidebook and seeing how that dovetails with city policies and the ability for our two entities to work together? Because I see that as one where we're going down the same tracks on a lot of issues. So I know I was intrigued by the last two work sessions that we had on the climate guidebook, and I know that they're doing a lot of work on climate. They're hiring people on, so that might be an area as well, just to touch base with them and let them know that we're a resource here for their disposal if they need it.
I know I'm in the meeting, so, but I'm doing this through you. I think it's a good opportunity to see if the loop is closing with council leadership, city leadership. I know that our staffs are working closely together. Kelly's working with city staff on reporting mechanisms and standards. So and their new sustainability director, I believe it is. But it'd be nice to know how much of that is sort of coming full circle into the council purview, that we are working together. We've got this guidebook. It's a resource, just to check and see if that loop is closing.
One thing that I took away from our meeting yesterday with customer service, and I think one of the asks that we have been floating around is how do we work together with the city on dealing with rentals? And after I walked away from the meeting yesterday, I didn't feel like we had information enough to have an ask there. It seems like there's lots of other data that we need to collect and have a real sense of, how much market there really is there, how the programs are. I mean, they're clearly being effective. We're hitting our targets. We're getting the savings, but how do we partner with City of Eugene to kind of advance that further and what the difference is? I don't think that we have the information that we need to, and that's probably part of why this hasn't really gone anywhere yet. We don't have a compelling story for us to tell ourselves before we bring it out and want to the city. Maybe others have difference of opinion, but that's what my takeaway was yesterday.
I think it would be great for us. I mean, I don't know if staff have ideas about what is a program or something that we would love to expand or something new we'd like to see. If we talked about EV charging or something like that, and kind of come up with a rough draft of a proposal that we could give to the city, because I think that the format that we're in right now, like either they don't have the capacity or their city leadership isn't like super connected with the staff that are doing the work. Like, I just don't know how some policy or some collaboration is going to come up. I feel like we need to think about what would be a great program that we want to do that we can't totally do on our own, but the city could help us make that happen.
My only concern is death by 1,000 cuts. We've had this affordability issue for a long time, and we've got a lot of pressures for upward rates. And each one of these small things, when considered as a whole, are going to push rates up. And we're going to have to pick and choose which ones are important. Is it reliability? Is it resiliency? I mean, or is it climate? And so I want to be very cautious that we don't get ourselves in a perception with the city that we're the money bags, because, we're not like them. They have to live with what they get. We used to just have a budget and the rates would reflect it. We don't do that anymore. We say, let's keep it with inflation or within 2 to 3% and get it reversed. But I'm worried about the affordability factor, where we're going to be in 3 to 5 years. And this, because we're already, people are already rent burdened, a ton of them. I've heard that yesterday, the information I got yesterday was 53,000 homes have already been weatherized, and that's 75% of our housing stock. And the biggest bang for the buck is for not the houses, it's for the commercial and things like that. And so how this is going to play out, I think we really need to think about it, because I don't want to get us set up to be money bags. And then, we've got people at the podium saying, I can't afford this. Because, you know, we're starting on a trend that a lot of you haven't experienced, and that's rate increases, and we've got some pretty big ones coming up. And I keep reminding you, we don't have Lieber factored in our rate increases. We don't have a negative lawsuit packed into our rate increases and a few other things that we don't even know about right now. So I just want to remind people to be cautious about how we approach this, at least in the economic aspect.
I agree with you, and I heard from yesterday's meeting, and tell me if I heard it wrong, but just that some of the money we get through Rex, that they foresee that there's gonna be an increase in that dollar amount that we get, and that, sometimes it's, you have to figure out how to spend that money. So I'm thinking of like money like that, where there's like a direct stream that we kind of put back into the system that way.
That's fine. I'm rate weary is what I'm concerned about. And I'm not saying anything's not worthy. It's just that I want to make sure that we keep that in the back of our mind, of the affordability factor, because we provide a service and a commodity that's not variable. I mean, it hurts me to hear about people not doing medication or food because they have to heat their house.
Well, and I don't want to just manufacture a program for the sake of trying to work with the city. I would rather, if we have a program and it looks like there's a barrier or something that the city can do that we can enhance or build, that's great, but I don't want to just manufacture something for the sake of trying to work with the city. The other thing that this goes to the rate and to the increased money that I think will be available. However, that IRA money that's coming down, I want to make sure that we're poised to get as much of that as humanly possible for us as a community. And if that's through the city, if that's through EWEB or whatever community partners, that we are poised to get it and get the grants in quickly and win them so that we bring as much of that money back in. So if there are ways in which we need to partner with the city or other organizations or, in that regard, that to me would be something that I think would be very beneficial. But I know that it's hard to know because they haven't quite released the parameters of what each of those programs look like. So I think maybe, putting something on the agenda to just put that out there as, hey, we want to work with you if there are needs once those parameters get released.
Yeah, I think there are opportunities to work with the city in ways that sort of complement the community. There are certain, I think you're referring to the fuel credits, where when we receive those have to be for particular purposes. And so in those cases where it doesn't go into the general fund, we're looking to actually assign those to community value. Certainly understand the flip side of that, where we're also looking at affordability and trying to leverage different kinds of funding sources. Of which that one, the IRA, we're poised. We have a group that is looking at opportunities there. Much of those incentives will come as point of use or sort of point of sale through sort of like Lowe's or Home Depot, where you might buy something and they'll be sort of built into the price or through a rebate. Some of those are going to come through tax credits, of which all of those, the utility itself is not participating. But where the utility is participating or where the city is participating, we will certainly be putting ourselves in a position to use that efficiently and effectively. So all that said, for a city conversation is that we are poised. We see this as an opportunity. We want to make sure we're aligned with them and looking for things that can help our community. And I do know that our staff works pretty well together. I mean, we've come up with drive EV programs and other things where these are all partnerships. They're not EWEB by ourselves, and we want to continue to look at that. Maybe the message to the city is we want to continue to look for those.
Okay, so just real quick to reiterate then, so the items that we highlighted tonight, we already have the agenda from last month. We add these in our expansion of EV charging. There's any way to partner there. Programs around, well, I heard Resiliency, again, I can't remember if we have that up, but that was an item that was put out. And,
College Hill.
yes,
Yeah, College Hill.
College Hill, yes. Okay. Those three? Okay, excellent. Okay. With that, I think we will close out this item and we'll move to the next. Pre-funding, funding options for Lieber Hydroelectric Project. Give Deborah a little bit of a break and then we'll bring her back up.
Extraordinary event.
The extraordinary event. This is probably not quite as unexciting as when I was here 15 minutes ago. Good evening, commissioners. Tonight, we're here to talk about Lieberg pre-funding and funding options. Aaron Balmer, who is our acting financial services manager, is here with me, and he's going to start us off.
Yes, thank you. So good evening, commissioners. Again, Aaron Balmer. For the record, I feel like I drew the short straw getting to talk about this topic this evening as we're kind of getting into it here, but here we go nonetheless. So setting the stage, here's the situation. We need to pay for decommissioning, which spans 18 years and amounts to $225 million. So the chart shows projected annual spending based on results from the triple bottom line analysis, and the shaded area shows the scope of the upcoming long-term financial plan. So we'll be bringing draft plans to the board in July. So the question is, how shall we model Lieber as it runs through 2033? We're hoping to gather board thoughts this evening, and it's important to note, I think, with this slide, I want to emphasize the timing. So we still have some runway today before costs really ramp. And the intent is to position the utility to make good financial decisions into the 2030s and beyond. So with that as our situation, what are our goals? What is the framework we are operating under? We seek to abide by and employ our rate-making principles in compliance with board policy. And all this while upholding our core values, specifically affordability. As it relates to Lieberg, we seek to contain costs and maintain financial flexibility and resiliency. Again, looking to position the utility to make strong financial decisions into the future. And in that endeavor, we strive to do right by the community and the customers that we serve. Looking to our rate-making principles at the base of this pyramid graphic, equity, and specifically intergenerational equity among customers has really left the building in the context of this particular project. We recognize and acknowledge this is not ideal, as customers bearing the cost to decommission are not benefiting from Lieberg's service. Finally, the agenda topic this evening is titled pre-funding/funding options, and there are a couple of reasons why we might consider pre-funding, and those include the ability to maintain resiliency and financial flexibility. Also, having some pre-funding would allow us flexibility to enter the debt markets for an issuance if needed. And finally, rates and fees have no interest expense associated to them as a borrowing would. So looking to some of the funding options we have, there are a number of varying pressures and tensions to consider. The big three options, fees, rates, and debt, are what we are centering the discussion on for now. Recent federal legislation, as just mentioned, holds potential for grant assistance, though this is still being monitored and evaluated by staff. We do anticipate funding in this arena to be geared towards a return to pre-construction conditions, though. Okay, so the table on the right shows general impacts. This is all else equal, general impacts to board metrics resulting from implementing a fee or a rate or issuing debt. The fee and rate columns have been condensed because the metric impacts are the same. Green is favorable, with a particular arrow, green is favorable, red is unfavorable. And so current pressured metrics for the electric system include the debt to net book value ratio and the rate of return. Debt to net book value would increase from further debt issuance, which would further pressure the metric. And rate of return would increase implementing either a fee or a rate, which would ease pressure on that metric. In our last long-term financial plan presented last fall, the most pressured metric for the electric utility was days cash, which would increase and benefit from implementing a fee or a rate and thereby building reserves. Debt service coverage, while not officially a pressured metric, does present special consideration, as significant trouble with debt service coverage could lead to a technical default on bonds. Board targets keep us safely in line with bond covenants, but pressures to this metric, which would be additional debt and related debt service, could result in rate increases to maintain the metric as opposed to a cost-based requirement. There's a lot of red in the debt column. The debt is not empirically bad. There are benefits of debt, and that includes being able to spread costs over a broad period of time, which reduces rate pressures. And it doesn't unduly over-collect from customers today. There can be a high degree of funding practicality and certainty in using debt. So some hypothetical, high level, and I want to stress high level scenarios to help make this real. Implementing a $5 flat fee would generate approximately $5.2 million per year and cover about 45% of the total outflows over the 18-year period. Implementing a $5 fee would be the equivalent of roughly a 2.79% increase on the average residential bill. Assuming we build reserves early on as inflows exceed outflows and as represented by this little green shaded area, we can then use those reserves as costs outpace cash inflows from the fee as represented by the blue area. There comes a point in time at which those reserves run out, and that is noted by the little star. In this scenario, we can then issue debt and to secure continued funding for decommissioning. Debt levels in this scenario are about 120 million, and that would require about a 7% rate increase to service that debt. Issuing debt entails paying interest, which adds another 110 million for interest expense over the life of that debt. Quick note on the debt, we're modeling 30 years at 5%. Administering a fee would be relatively easy, and it would also provide the ability to sunset the fee after decommissioning. Hypothetical scenario number 2, implementing a 1% rate increase each year over the next 4 years would ramp up to generate about $8 million a year and cover about 60% of the total outflows over the 18-year period. Assuming we build reserves early on as inflows exceed outflows, and again is represented by the green shaded area, we can use those reserves as costs outpace in cash inflows as represented by the blue area. And again, there comes a point in time at which those reserves run out. And in this scenario, again, we can look to debt as noted by the star to secure continued funding for decommissioning. Debt levels in this hypothetical scenario are $92 million. That would be approximately a 5% rate increase needed to service that debt. And then, again, interest expense associated with that would add $85 million over the life. One administrative consideration with a fee consumption is that with EES ramping up, it may be beneficial to wait for the new billing system to implement the new tied to consumption. following decommissioning, using a rate, for example, assuming decommissioning efforts end in 2040, the continued rate revenue could offset required debt service. In our final scenario this evening, it shows implementing both a $5 flat fee and leaning into a 1% rate increase. So combining the two prior examples. The initial $5 fee and the 1% rate increase would be the equivalent of a 3.79% increase to the average residential bill. It's about $6.79. This would ramp to generate about $14 million a year and cover total outflows over the 18-year period. As in the other scenarios, but at a greater scale, we assume building reserves early on as inflows exceed outflows. Green shaded area. Using those reserves as costs outpace the cash inflows from the fee and rate increase, the blue area. Again, even here, there's a little star, and that is the point at which those reserves would run out. We could then borrow to secure continued funding for decommissioning, but because the amount needed is roughly $7 million, it could potentially be pulled from other reserves. And while there is a window where additional funds would be needed in 2035, where the star is, it could be replenished or repaid by 2038 as decommissioning costs decline. Debt levels in this scenario, again, for that $7 million would be approximately a 0.4% rate increase needed to service that level of debt. And again, interest expense over the life of the debt, approximately $6 million. Again, assuming a very easy payment. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Deborah to get discussion.
So preparations are underway for the 2024 budget and draft long-term financial plans that we'll be bringing back here in July. We were looking forward to the discussion this evening on how to interweave Lieber decommissioning costs into those plans that we're going to bring back to you. We want to acknowledge or recognize that no options are a perfect fit, and because we're placing the burden on our current and future ratepayers. There, as Aaron mentioned before, there is no intergenerational equity. For tonight, what we'd like to understand is what principles and values matter most to you, and to gauge your appetite for collecting in advance and building reserves. Based on your feedback this evening, we will bring back a recommendation on the draft long-term financial plan in July. We just listed a couple of points up here to prompt discussion. So with that, I will hand it back to you, President Carlson.
Well, I have a couple of questions. Ben, I don't see anybody chomping at the bit just yet. Can you go back a couple of slides, just on the? Anyone? Sure, that's fine. That's fine too. Any one of them. So when you're saying we're pre-funding this green shape here, it seems to suggest that it only offsets the part that's highlighted in blue, but if we implement a rate or a fee, that continues forward, right? Past where that blue mark is, and that's still included in this calculation. Okay, just wanted to make sure, because the way that this didn't look like it was carrying forward
The
there.
line that carries on across the bottom there, to that initial slide, that was there, that is a base level of funding.
Okay, all right, so in any of the scenarios that you've brought to us, once we implement that, it goes indefinitely until we stop that, and that's the costs that are saved through these different mechanisms. And remind me again, how much do we kind of save on a debt service perspective on each of these different scenarios? So if we are pre-funding it, then we're not borrowing. So how much cost do we save? Do you have that?
By not borrowing.
Yeah, by not borrowing each of those, yeah.
In the first scenario, borrowing levels of 120 million, there would be interest expense associated to that of 110 million.
Spread out over 30 years.
I don't know, 95 million.
85 on the second one, yeah.
And then on the next one, this is 60, no, this is,
This is the 85. They all look very similar. So yeah, the first one, 110, the second one, 85.
okay, great, thank you. All right, and
I feel like I've asked this question before talking about this, or at least in a different context, but like, for what percentage of our customers do you think a $5 per month increase? And, you know, like,
How many of our, I don't have that, I don't have that number, where that tips people over to an energy burden. Is that,
yeah,
Frank? I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I can, so energy burden being classified as 6% of somebody's income going to energy, that's not energy and water. The statistics I've seen relative to Eugene and Lane County say that about, I think it's around 19-20% of the population qualifies for these various programs as limited income. Some of those are based off of a percentage of Oregon's median income or national poverty level. And so I would expect our customer base to be somewhat similar in proportion. We do have a number of those programs to help them, but just as a rough guidance, I would say just somewhere between 15 and 20%.
I guess the same question, you know, some people might be able to absorb an extra $5 a month. If we do the 1% rate increase with that fee, right, that would be like $11.
679.
Oh, so it's not the $5 plus the,
It was the $5 plus the 1%, but that initial impact would be $6.79 on the average residential.
for the consumption-based rate, I just wonder, like, looking at our values and if that would negatively affect people that don't have control over, say, how energy efficient their house is, or, right? So they have like an old leaky house and they're renting, or that they don't have the means to put into their house. I would just worry equity-wise that that just might be a problem. And when we raise rates to pay off debt, when the debt is paid off, then do our rates go down, or how does that work? Or do we get used to paying that much and we keep it that way?
Historically, there have been new borrowings, there have been refinancing. In my memory or research, the only time we have borrowed was when we renewed WS fee on water utility.
I would say that and both utilities treat this slightly differently. But if you look at the fact that both utilities are very asset intensive in their business models, and the replenishment of those assets are just part of the course of us doing business. Typically, we are in the constant process of borrowing. This being an, I'll call it extraordinary situation, may be treated differently specifically because of the fact that it will have a start and an end to that. Now, I don't think any of you will be on the board when that comes to pass in 45 years. But I would say this is different from history. The one thing I would also add, just as a little bit of context, is we can't just look at this borrowing or this pre-financing in isolation. We do have, over the course of the next 10 years, a $600 million capital plan, of which there's a portion of that is risk-based or turn the dial up, the dial down capability. Now, you bear different risks when you do that. And so I don't want to say that this is, oh, we turn down everything else to do this, but it has to be be part of that context. But yeah, I would say that routinely we have continued a borrowing cycle. So kind of once you get into that, you're in it. You don't roll it back.
And then one last question. So $225 million. I remember when we were looking at all the different scenarios, there was like a range of what each one could cost. So, how do we make sure that we have flexibility if it costs us a lot more than $225 million? Or somehow the stars aligned and we're lucky and it costs us significantly less. I know that won't happen, but how do we make sure that we're flexible enough so that whatever plan we have, it works well?
I liked your latter scenario the best, although I'm probably not too optimistic. So one of the ways in which we make sure that we are maintaining flexibility is that you all have given us targets to monitor, and we forecast every year, multiple times a year. We review the long-term financial plan and continue to watch the landscape for concerns that we might have. Some level of pre-funding also helps with that flexibility because it does reduce the pressure of on borrowing. And it also could provide some flexibility on when we entered the market, because it's not always a great time to enter the market. So those are a couple of ways. Frank?
I was going to say that is a perfect question. And the reason that it's important for what we bring back to the board as a recommendation, we talk a lot in this room about resiliency. Financial resiliency is also important because there could be a number of things that happen here. Costs could go up or they could go down, which is what you point out. The schedule could get pushed out or be accelerated. There are some regulatory bodies involved in this process. And so when we bring back our recommendation, one of the big considerations we're going to be putting into that recommendation is which of these options provide the best financial resiliency for whatever board is dealing with this in the early 2030s. Because I think what we need to do at this time is to set the organization up to be able to have some resiliency and flexibility in the decision-making at that process, at that time, for exactly the question that you raised.
I know other people have things to say. I just want to say of your questions, I absolutely support.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bill we have to pay, right? We know we have to pay it. We put it on a credit card. We take some money out of our paycheck each week until we have enough money to pay it. For me, I'm with Commissioner Brown. I understand the burdens that we place on our customers when we raise rates. But for me, of the three scenarios that were raised here, the third scenario is the one that I lean into the most. And one of the main reasons is something that President Carlson alluded to. Between $90 and $110 million in interest that we pay if we're borrowing a huge chunk in 2028 or 2034. As opposed to $7 million in debt in 2035 or whatever on the third one. $7 million, we may be able to fund that out of reserves and not even have to go into debt. So for me, that's where I see us going. I understand the burden that we're placing on some of our ratepayers. But one question I have here, so on that third scenario, it's a 1% increase for 4 years, and then the increase doesn't keep going up after 4 years. You've got $5 plus 4 years of 1%, and then that levels off. The $5 remain, the 1% increases stop. So to me, again, it's biting the bullet early. Is is the most acceptable way. Next question that I had, and I raised it in a pre-meeting question, is how does a fee as opposed to a rate increase transpose to silt?
It's an excellent question, and we do feel like there may be a difference in how the city will treat a fee versus a rate. And we would want to engage with the city before we brought any recommendation back so that we were perfectly clear on that. Any way that we avoid paying silt on it is a 6% discount.
And then lastly, the third thing that I like about the third scenario, it goes to Frank's financial resiliency, because not only do we have this to deal with, we also have Walterville as an unanswered question. So if we can pre-fund this, and maybe that leaves us the flexibility to have debt coverage in case we need to use debt to take care of Walterville. If we use a bunch of debt on this one, then we're jeopardizing our ratings and our debt ratio if we have unforeseen things with Walterville and building up a sinking fund for that. So I lean into biting the bullet and going with scenario 3.
I just want to reiterate, so when we relicensed this, we spent, let's say, $150 million, and we were going to recover that over 40 years. And we're not going to do that now. So we have an unamortized debt that we don't have any revenue to offset. So that, like $75 million is not factored into this 225, correct? So
Yes,
I'm trying to get the net cost. So what would really help me, because I know how percentages can be deceptive, because all of those years you have in there in our long-term financial plan, we already have rate increases in there. So when you say you were going to raise rates of 1%, but we're also going to raise them 3.5%, the compound effect is not 1%. So is there a way you can show me a graph where the dollar amount is? Because if we start at 1, and you look at the affordability like we always do when we do our long-term plan, show me the actual dollar amount this is going to hit a household with, because right now I'm just thinking, well, 1% is nothing, but it is not 1% mathematically. It's a whole lot more. Dollar-wise, it comes out to quite a bit more because our rates are projected to go up 35% in the next 10-year period. Correct. The long-term financial plan. And so when we raise them a percentage and we think about that is not being, I would like to see what that does to the typical household. Because personally, if you could do that for me, I mean, I can do the math, but I got a full plate already. But if you could show me, because that affordability is going to be important. I agree with John B. too, that the way to do it is with rates and pre-fund it and things like that. I don't want to borrow into this, but I'm concerned. And then my last real quick question is, most construction projects have a 30% contingency. And the 225, is that with the 30%, or have we gone a high and a low, or is the 225 the
The 225 was from the.
Okay, so we're budgeting at the 225, but the contingency is 30% variable either way.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, if you could get me, just show me, when we start this out with our already baked in rate projections, and then we throw this on top of it, what that does to a typical household bill, dollar wise, not percentage wise, that would give me a better optic of what we're doing. And I think it's important that we let our ratepayers see what's happening, not just tell them what's the percentage. So thank you.
It's a very good point. And that's part of why starting early has a more dramatic effect.
Yeah, well.
We will
Compounding.
bring that back.
It's a compounding function. I know what it's gonna look like, I think.
I was just going to respond to Commissioner Brown and say that entire aggregation is what we plan to bring back in July with the long-term financial plan, because this is one of multiple issues. It's one of issues that we've already baked in. We need to look at it in the context of other capital So that entire aggregation and where we land as a recommendation will be exactly in the format that you're looking for there. And from a contingency perspective, I would say that it's not quite adding 30%. When we did the scenario analysis, we provided a plus and minus range. Mean was a combination of that. So there may be, it's probably not appropriate just to simply add a contingency, given it was a means of a number of different scenarios. It doesn't get around the goal that I think several of you talked about, which is financial resiliency, because the prices can go up and down. But it's probably not appropriate to just take 225 and add 30%. So because of how we calculated the 225.
Thanks.
Sure, thanks. Is there any way we can put Lieberg genie back in the bottle? This is really messy. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's not fun for anybody, but I appreciate people engaging us in these questions at this point of the planning effort. So I have one question about intergenerational equity. You bring up both of those when we're comparing the positives and negatives to each. And you have intergenerational equity on both for pre-funding or for with debt. Is there a difference in the intergenerational equity between the two of those? And if so, can you explain?
So it's negative in both cases. And it really depends on how much borrow. There's a tension between a lot of these things. So how much you're going to borrow and how much you're going to pre-fund with borrowing. You do add interest, but you also extend out the period of time. So, all things being equal, and I don't know what the rates are going to be out in the future, but we would expect that to create a little bit lower rate burden to spread it out over a longer period of time. And pre-funding shortens that time period. And that's why there may be a benefit to looking at some sort of a combination too, where we can ease some of it by extending it out, but we still preserve our financial resiliency and flexibility by collecting in the form of a fee or a rate earlier in the process.
That makes sense. And that's my inclination, as Borowski suggested, is to pre-fund to the extent we can. But I guess the number one priority from my perspective would be to provide future boards as much flexibility as we possibly can to deal with unexpected costs. And second to that would be, gradualism to spread things out. I'm sure there's a tension between the two of those, but my first would be providing boards flexibility. I mean, I just think we're going to get curveballs, or there's potential for curveballs that grows as things warm and conditions change in ways that we aren't expecting, and that just feel like leaving our future boards with as much flexibility as possible has to be the priority from my perspective. In terms of affecting lower income households, whatever we do here is going to affect lower income households. I really appreciated the presentation we had earlier this week. Programs. A couple of things I learned is that our current annual bill pay assistance tops out at like $280 or $250 per year per household. And it feels like maybe we need to think about bumping up that total annual benefit that's available to low income households as we enter into in 5 or more % increases. And the other thing is we have really great programs where we will pay for the full cost of insulating low-income households, even if they're occupied by renters. And it feels like we should be promoting the heck out of that as a way not to save energy necessarily, but to help insulate those lower-income households from what feels kind of inevitable. And then my last thought is that I think we should make a specific direct ask to the city to ask them not to charge a silt on top of this, because it's going to be punishing as it is. And I think they could hopefully appreciate that. And I think it's a totally reasonable request. I don't usually try to wade into silt because I think it's kind of messy and not very fruitful, but I do feel like this is a place where we can and should ask for them to rethink at least this piece of the silt.
Completely agree on the silt. I think we should add that to All right.
I know I'm outside the queue, but I just wanted to comment on the SILT. I have in the past raised the issue with the city manager, and she didn't commit, but she said she was open to the conversation.
That would be a major win for our ratepayers, because every time we have to raise it, it's an addition onto that, and it's not something that, the reason we have the SILT is an offset for property taxes. And that doesn't feel like an adequate, way to deal with that. There are limitations to other property taxes.
That's the agenda.
Yes, I'm still, I have that already. In terms of the timing and the intergenerational aspect, to me, the inequity is kind of already passed, because the people who got the benefit from Leberg and the power generation, they got power before 2018. And we're in a range of nobody from here forward is going to get any benefit out of Leberg. So for me, we've already passed the level of, equity in terms of benefit and who's paying for it. So for me, I mean, limiting that amount of debt that we're paying, and, for some of the other reasons, providing boards with future flexibility. I do like the idea of pre-funding to the extent we can, but I do want to make sure that we are cognizant of the affordability aspect. And, it seems like all of the options that we have for pre-funding shrink it down to about a third of the amount of time. Is there, just throwing wild ideas out there, is there a way to spread the decommissioning piece out so that the cost itself and the amount that we get burdened are spread out further, so that limits the rates? Or is that a whole other cost ballgame that ends up ballooning costs? What do we know?
You're speaking to relative schedule. I think some of that comes in a combination of the decommissioning action plan and whatever settlement parties we're negotiating with. There's a number of stakeholders involved in that process. And so until we go through that process, there's a number of permitting steps. Until we actually get into the requirements, we won't know how much flexibility we have to that. It's probably anticipated that it will stretch out. The probability of stretching out is better than the probability of condensing it.
Yeah. And we have, we have operating cost. What are our main operating costs then? Lowering and raising the dam, right? And because we're not getting any power generation from it. So what other operating costs would we be extending out that would maybe increase the cost versus giving the people upriver a greater chance to, deal with, hey, this whole landscape is going to be changing. I know 10 years is a great runway there, but just throwing it out as an idea, if we're spreading it out anyway, and if we're spreading out that pre-funding cost, maybe we hit most of it and we get some more of that gradualism.
So extending it out does mean rising construction costs. And we do, for our board policies, and certainly appropriate policies, our investments are all very safe, and that tends to mean lower returns on our investment. And so it is very possible that we would see over that time period that construction costs would rise faster than our earnings.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Just spitballing an idea there. So, okay, otherwise, I'm definitely in favor of more of the pre-funding and look forward to June. It looks like a bit more of and what does that actually look like for the average ratepayer? And Borowski.
I guess my question is, looking at this at residential and ratepayers, what about our commercial? Is it going to be a $5 per commercial one? And the other thing that I'm seeing there is that leaves me more to the rate increase, because you're getting more from the commercial operators because they're paying more. And a lot of the people that in the commercial side of this actually did benefit from the power that was generated by Lieber because they've been in the community for a long time. You look at IP, you look at a lot of these commercial people, and they did benefit from some of that. Whereas somebody who is turning on their lights at home that just bought a home may not. So I guess the question I have is $5 flat fee, that's going to be indexed to a commercial and then the other one is, that leads me towards going with the 1% rate increase for 4 years because that generates more than flat fees in my opinion.
So we have an opportunity. These were numbers to bring a little context, not recommendations, but something to start a conversation. What we really need for July is to gauge the amount of pre-funding. And then within that conversation, there's a lot of nuance. Do we collect it in a flat fee? Do we collect it in a consumption base? Do we do a blend? And how do we differentiate between our class of customers? So this was a very generic number. I wouldn't anticipate that a flat fee would hit a commercial customer the same way that it would a residential customer. But those are just thoughts, not a fully formed plan.
Yeah, I think Deborah classified this really well in sort of two steps. How much do you pre-fund? How much do you use your credit card? A step after that is really the rate design piece of this, which is there are different ways to index even fees. You know, on the water side, we've done it by size of meter, for example. On the electric side, we could look at things such as the demand piece of it, demand charge. There's a difference between small commercial, large commercial. So I think that's another thing that we'll take a look at as part of our preparation. And there's different impacts on equity related to those as well. So I think I'm going to have to take this in a couple different steps.
A question in terms of, I'm hearing a lot of the commissioners lean towards a degree of pre-funding. And apologies to jump through the slide deck here. But keeping affordability in mind, you know, that kind of bent on the green shaded area is, you know, theoretically where reserves would peak out. So we would be holding a high degree of reserves if we're pre-funding. But, you know, understanding that from an investment standpoint, we have to pursue safety and liquidity over return. And recognizing that we're still very much slowly coming out of a historically low interest rate environment for us to invest in. Is there any feeling or sense on how much reserves is too much? So for example, again, high level scenario, the numbers here would have us holding approximately $50 million in reserves for this kind of scenario analysis. That, you know, is that a comfort level in terms of people potentially looking to EWEB and saying, hey, why are you holding this much money? Or is people reel that in, I guess. And from a, again, long-term financial plan modeling scenario, how much is too much?
From my perspective, it doesn't seem like $15 million is too much to hold on to. It does seem like, and I talked about this before, there's kind of the flip side of debt is that with pre-funding, we're not likely to even get as much in interest as we're losing money, right, on those dollars, aren't we? In terms of, I mean, if we're in the 6% inflation, you know, year on year for a couple more, I mean, we don't know when that ends. Actually, if you can tell us when that ends, that would be super helpful. But
July.
I mean, but even if it comes down, right, if we're seeing like regular rates of inflation of 3%, then we're probably only getting 1 or 2% return on our investment. We're losing money effectively with that pre-funding.
It was ratepayer money we collected, so I'm not sure I'd term it losing money, but our construction costs rise over time and our ratepayers are giving us those funds when they had other investment opportunities. So we take money that in theory, they maybe would have invested at a better rate or put to a different use, and we're investing it at a low interest rate. And that is one of the places that we see tension.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the same time, I guess from my perspective, building reserves to the extent we can still, as long as we're not overstepping into a place where we're really getting taxed by rates of inflation. But I mean, that suggests to kind of get like year by year approach, which I don't know if that's.
There's, the thing I love about addressing this now is that we still have time. We're compressing 18 years worth of costs right now into one conversation. And our long-term financial plans are something that we look at each year. So this picture is going to come into focus over time. You know, it's not a set it and forget it situation if we are pursuing it.
When will we know what FERC's going to tell us about Walterville in this story?
Walterville in what context, Commissioner?
Well, in the context of the licenses are tied together, and if we decommission this, aren't they going to ask us to, and then potentially just for them to have us do something to Walterville?
That scenario's gonna happen either way.
So I'm just wondering for our financial planning, go through this thinking there's $225 million thing, we start raising rates, but then somebody decides that it's not 225, it's more like 325. Because we have to, I mean, Walterville isn't, you know, it's got problems too.
Right. I think that from a financial planning perspective, and part of the reason that I think you approach this looking at sort of resiliency as one of the drivers is that you do know that scenarios are going to evolve. That said, Walterville and Leesburg are in pretty different risk positions. Walterville does have an existing license. There may be some work required there, but we have the opportunity to recapture that over the remaining part of the license. With a whole bunch of things coming together in a pinnacle and probably around the early 2030s, where we would know where on that curve we are with Leesburg, and simultaneously the board at that time will be deciding the future course of Walterville. And so I think if this board approaches it in the manner of giving that future board the opportunity and the flexibility to make a decision and not be boxed into a corner, I think is one of the drivers. There's lots of tensions, and I think you've touched on a lot of them, between gradualism and affordability, the rate of return, you know, EWEBs versus our customers overall. These are all things that are in tension, and we're going to have to bring back to this board a balanced approach to how we deal with all those issues. But I think that we'll know more as we go along and have conversations with FERC, but I think they're in different risk positions.
Krantz just added to the chat. I don't know if everybody saw that we're going to do a triple bottom line Walterville starting in 2024. That we expect to generate through the license.
When does my term end?
Whenever you want it to.
Yeah, we do have provisions. I mean, we can.
16 more years.
We worked on that policy last year.
You want to watch? You got to sit here for 16 more years.
I think Frank said 45, actually. Isn't that what you challenged us all to be here in 45 years from now?
Yeah, well, that's, you're making decisions that you're gonna have to live with from now on, so.
You guys have everything you need?
I heard was a strong desire to pre-fund. We'll work on some scenarios for you all and have an opportunity to maybe talk more in July about what those different pre-funding options would look like.
And we will bring back to this board a recommendation, but and we will also bring back the basis for that recommendation. So that you understand, if we're recommending this, there's a financial strategy behind it that we feel like we can support and that hopefully you can support.
And hard dollar amounts.
Thank you. Aggregated with all the other stuff.
That was not as fun as my last presentation.
Well, we're at break time, and I think we should take it. So let's take our 10-minute break and come back at 7:45. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
7:45, let's pick a good one again. Computer.
Pretend to give Kelly 10 seconds.
Somebody's echoing.
No, it's not. No, it's Kelly, it's not.
I don't mean to point fingers.
The new person in the room.
This is the problem. There's no problem. There it is. Direction.
College, just say something.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioner President Carlson, Commissioners, General Manager Lawson. I'm Karen Kelly, Chief Operations Officer, and tonight with me is Mike Masters, our Water Operations Manager, and Susan Fricke, our Water Quality Assurance and Water Resources Supervisor.
It's a long one.
We're excited to be here to talk with you tonight about the State of the Watershed Report, and thankful that you guys asked us to come and present on that. I think it will be a little bit maybe more positive than our downer on the financial. I had to get that in for Deborah's sake. But I did want to just take this moment to remind folks that in the water utility, we do follow the multiple barrier approach to safe drinking water, in which our source water protection is the first step of that. So we wanted to talk about that today and all the good things that our staff does to follow that and make sure that we're mitigating for any risks from source to tap, the whole shebang. So we're going to talk about that first step tonight, where we monitor for and both proactively and reactively address the highest threats to our drinking water from a source water quality perspective. So I'm going to turn this over to Mike and Susan to give you all the details of that and the work that we've been able to accomplish, not just EWEB, but also with our partners over the last year.
So good evening, Commissioners, President Carlson. As Karen said, I'm Mike Masters. I'm the Water Operations Manager. So we're here to give you some highlights from the 2022 State of the Watershed Report. We'll be going over a review of that report, provide some relevant information, updates, and answer a few questions at the end. So we have 3 goals for drinking water source protection. Number 1 is to work with partners to maintain source water quality. 2, prioritize benefits to water treatment and electric generation in the McKenzie watershed. And 3, promote public awareness and stewardship. Some highlights, watershed summary. Source water protection continued post-holiday farm fire response by working with landowners through the Pure Water Partners, as well as working on federal and private land on larger restoration projects. Despite the fire, water quality remains excellent in the McKenzie River. Please.
So I'm going to do some of the highlights from our report today. So EWEB and USGS have what we call continuous monitoring stations in the McKenzie watershed. We run water quality data sondes that measure water quality information. So these are our probes that we put in. They're little cylinder things. We slap them in the water, and then they take measurements for us every 15 minutes. They things like temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, and like this figure is showing us turbidity. So the green line is from 2022. This is near Vita. You can see that the turbidity spiked, if you can see that, in January. And then we also had a couple little spikes in November and December, but definitely much less turbidity than we're seeing in the other years post-holiday farm fire. Generally at this spot, David, who's in the audience today, tells me we're less than 2 FNU, which is one of the units of measurement. So the fact that we're seeing something like 90 is a lot when we're generally at 2, but this is like storm events that are coming through. One of the other highlights from this year is that we put a sonde in at Quartz Creek. And what that's important is we're going to do a stage 0 restoration project there. And so this will be like our pre-data, our baseline data for that spot. And the data is already being used by universities and other governmental agencies for this. It's really exciting to have pre and post data for one of these projects. Going a little off script, so it'll be fun. Okay, so then here we're looking at the harmful algal blooms for this year. And what was notable about this year is if you look at the little X's with the little dots in between them. So with the little X's with the dots in between them, did I skip something? What you see with that is we had it above the reporting limit for some of June and July. And where we were seeing that was in Blue River Reservoir. And so we had detectable amounts of the cylindrosperm opsin in Blue River Reservoir, but we were not seeing any below the reservoir the entire year. So, and it also did not even get close to the levels that are of concern for drinking water. So, just detections. We like to show you all where it's there. And for storm, holiday, farm fire monitoring effects, we looked at water quality. We monitored baseline and storm samples. And so you can see we're showing 2020, 2021, and 2022. You can see that final storm in 2021 had like the highest of these parameters. This figure is looking at nitrate concentrations. We did see some, higher, more decent levels in January and November, but it does seem like it's declining over time. We ran a really successful spill drill that was well attended at Whiteley boat landing on the Willamette. Our partner specifically asked this year if we could do one on the Willamette instead of the McKenzie. It was great. We had our staff, David and Lisa, did a fantastic job with this drill. We had tons of organizations attend. It's always a really great thing. We also continued our illegal camp surveys in collaboration with Willamette Lane. And for urban runoff, what I wanted to really highlight is our partnership with the Urban Waters and Wildlife Program. We participate in this with a variety of organizations, including SUB, City of Springfield, MWMC, Eugene, and our local watershed councils. One of the current projects that they're working on right now is right above the intake at Hayden Bridge, and it's the Child Center. And as well as there's one, if you want to stop by and see a project happening, there's one at Willamette Christian Center. They're redoing the whole parking lot and putting some swales in where the water can go. And so had a little tour there the other day. We also did an update on the Pentacora plume because they just released that March 15th. So this is different than what's in your report. Overall, what we're seeing is that there's no compounds detected near the subwells, and pretty much every spot except for one is decreasing. That one even looks like it's decreasing since 2020. So we're keeping an eye on it. They release it right after we turn in the report for you all every year. So that's why this update's a little different. As far as this, for watershed recovery highlights, like Mike mentioned, we continue to great work with the Pure Water Partner Programs. We have over 167 landowners signed up with our 7-year watershed stewardship agreements. We also continued our property assessments with the Pure Water Partners to evaluate needs and opportunities for planting in riparian areas, invasive species control, biofuels reduction, erosion control, and naturescaping. And also with our other partners, the large scale restoration projects we worked on this year as they completed Deer Creek and Egg Creek, 2 different kinds of projects. And then we continued design for Finrock Phase 2, which will be happening this summer, and for Quartz Creek, which should hopefully part of it will start this fall. I think you've all heard a bunch about the septic assistance program, but we love to talk about this one. $3 million coming in for septic for low and middle income folks. We've had over 75 applications. We have new coming in every day. We have $1.5 million coming from Biz Oregon and Lake County and $1.5 million-ish coming from DEQ. So we're really excited to get those funds out on the ground finally. And then we continue to work on with our hazelnut farmers on a moth monitoring program. This has been really interesting because it's actually reduced, some of the farmers reduced their spraying from anywhere 1/3 to 1/2 to 2/3 by tracking the moths and how many are there. I think we had one farmer last year who said they ended up not spraying at all because the moth numbers stayed so low. That's great because it's less pesticide going into the river above the intake. And then for source water protection operations, just a few that we can highlight is we've got Aquarius database. So those songs that I was talking about, we have like a dozen, I think, out in the system, a bunch of them out right now. They take a data point for all the different parameters every 15 minutes. That is a lot of data if you run it all year round. So we've got this new database Aquarius that lets us manage that data in a really great way. And it'll let us put it on real time too, so that the agencies, universities, all of our other partners can be able to access that data to see what's going on. So they can look up at Quartz Creek and say, hey, what does the turbidity look like right now? So that's one of the advantages of that. Like I said before, we already have the Quartz Creek monitoring station is in place. And then Brenda worked on this really great harmful algal bloom monitoring map. And this was something for our community so that they can see what the results of our sampling is. You know, not quite real time, but within a few days, the results are updated. And that way we can kind of do a risk assessment of what the harmful algal blooms in the Mackenzie River are at the time. And we wanted to add in a little bit more just to remind folks about the Mackenzie Valley landowner incentives. We've got the stuff we talked about with the Pure Water Partners already. They're also doing a Mackenzie firewood program for low-income folks or elderly who can't get their own wood. Home site relocation funding, and then undergrounding the electric service lines. And of course, there's energy efficiency incentives for new construction. Then we also wanted to just highlight how much we enjoy working with our communications team on getting the word out about all these great projects and about the great source protection work that we're doing. Adam's videos are so popular. Everybody loves them, especially the firewood program one. It was a great one. It's so great to hear the feedback from the community and from our partners. And then another one I just wanted to highlight is that EWEB sponsored the Iliu Native Theater when they did the Salmon is Everything play, and that was really well received too. So any questions?
What would you like to make?
I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, as you know, this is my passion and everything else. So 16 years ago, I gave Carl Morgenstern a blank check, and I'm going to hand that check to you. The only thing I want you to understand is never run out of money in the septic program. That is a no-no in my book. So if you need money, come to me and I'll convince 2 others that you get it. But seriously, I had some concerns about some of the statistics in there, like in the November event when Hendricks, the E. coli went up tenfold. And is there a way to determine, is that human or animal?
There is a way. There is DNA testing that you can do on those. The thing you've got to know with bacteria, though, is there's a reason why you have to get 5 samples in 30 days to have it like a violation, to have it an issue. Because we can get little peaks of bacteria that come through, and it's not just one sample isn't necessarily an emergency. A few samples is like, hey, we should take a look at this and see if we can find where this is coming from. But David's done sampling in the past when we had bacteria hits that were pretty high within the city of Springfield and some of our urban outflows, and they did DNA testing and found it was dog.
Yeah.
So this could be.
I heard about the kennels and things
Yeah.
in Thurston area, but I was more concerned about people dumping their septic tanks in high water events. And is there a way, because I know there's a feed lot up there too, that feeds everything right down by the lake and when by the creek, and when it rains, we get a big dump of that nice stuff into the drinking water. So I'm wondering if is there any follow-up on that when you get those statistics? Do you guys just say, okay, it's a statistic, and put it in the book, or do you follow up on it?
I think for the bacteria, we'd like to have more than one hit because you do get those one hits. You can have anomalies within the system. If we start to see a trend where we're trending high quite often or for every storm, then I think we would do more investigation on it. A lot of times with bacteria, what you end up needing to do is bracketing it. So you do a site above and below where you think you have an issue to try to kind of hone in on where it is.
Okay. Another question, I noticed that we had some conversation about the child center and the new developments going in right at where our intake is. And they were permitted, and they've done that, and they put in additions and everything else, and they have their gutters and everything running right into the water there. Are we concerned about, what the Springfield mayor is concerned about, the course of the river changing right in that particular area and going straight into the well fields, and because it's not prevented, or have you guys been involved in that? I think Frank knows about it.
I know Wally McCullough had looked into that, and his opinion was not concerned at the moment. Same with our water treatment plant supervisor, Ray Light, as well, about, you know, how serious might this be. And at this point, they're not seeing a reason to be concerned. But that's not to say we shouldn't keep watching.
And then another one, if you look on page 23 of your handout, you can, for those of you that are not familiar with it, the IP has that big effluent pond right above our intake, and it's just an earthen berm, and it would liquefy in 2 seconds if we had an earthquake. What are we going to do? Are we just going to shut the whole system down if millions of gallons of pulp effluent is dumped in 4 miles from our intake?
You would have to.
I think, yeah, actually, probably so. something that significant, we would shut down. There'd be an opportunity to shut down treatment operations and let a lot of that pass by. And it sounds like an incredible amount to pass by with the flow in the river. You'd be surprised how fast that'll move by us. So it's not to underplay the disaster that would be, but we would literally shut down and let it pass by.
But we don't, that's our plan is a contingency, is if that berm's breached and it goes right in, I mean, it's gonna be a significant amount. We can shut it down quick enough.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't think we really have a plan in place for that specific event. With, as you mentioned, a lot of the earthquake related stuff is kind of hard to avoid some of that stuff, but definitely that would be the process. As soon as we had indication of anything coming down the river that was that significant, or even something less significant, we would figure out when it's going to come through, shut down the intake, and we should have plenty of water in the finished water reservoir to keep.
I can run a boat from that location to our intake in less than 4 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
just thinking about the severity of it, just bringing it up to highlight it. And so I'm sorry to dominate, but this is my baby. I get to talk, once, and you can shut me up for the rest of the year if you like.
That's another good thing, that the finished water reservoir kind of serves as a buffer for that too. So if we did get to it a little late, we can shut down and prevent anything like that from getting into the system.
Right, and we do, as you know, we do our spill drills every year to be able to respond to situations like this. This one is so close, however, we wouldn't have time to respond to that. So those are ones that are further upstream, and we have whole sorts of systems that track how long it takes those kind of contaminants to get to the intake. This one is so quick, we just shut it off immediately.
No, and I haven't seen a request for funding for the Willamette, because they've got all these oil trains with hundreds of oil cars that go up and down right along that river. Are we planning on, we've got the controls on the Mackenzie, but are we planning, I know our last drill was on the Willamette, but if a train derailment occurs with all those oil cars and it hits the river, it's done, I mean, for both us and Sub.
Right, well, Sub actually helped fund the similar system on the Middle Fork. And so I think we would want to work with partners too and do the Coast Fork as well. So they are participants in that. They helped fund that part. So we're checking in that and make sure everything's all up to speed. That's definitely something we want to have in place. And it's something David Donahue, who's one of our staff, who's awesome about tracking those kind of spills as well.
Last question. So we were going to put in a temperature monitor on the slough where IP dumps their boiler water in right above our intake. Have we put that in? And if so, have we been able to measure? Because I know that there's a lot of people complaining about some of their water coming in at over 70 degrees into the river. Have we put that monitor in? And if so, what's been the results?
We had some permitting delays on that, and we should be able to do that very soon, and I should be able to report on it to you the next time. Unfortunately, we were asked to do flooding, whole risk assessments on putting a pole into that location. So you and I, yes.
Concrete
A
pad.
concrete pad, we started with a concrete pad, and it was like, no, you have to do flood migration zone pole assessments. And then we're like, can we just put in a pole? And it was, so we've had a lot of back and forth negotiation on this, so we should have it soon.
I'd like to follow up on that, because I know they're dumping a lot of warm water into the river right there. And I just kind of like to.
Right. Well, one of the issues with that location, as you know, is it's very active. There's a lot of people that move through there. So whatever we do put in there, those sondes that I was telling you about are like $15,000 pieces of equipment. We can't just tuck one in on the riverbank and get that, because it'll be vandalized or whatnot. So we're trying to make sure we have a nice protected area where we can collect high quality data for you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, thank you for everything you do and everything you're going to do. And I really appreciate it, because the quality of our drinking water is unsurpassed, and I keep it up. And if ever you need anything, you know where to knock on.
Well, I'm glad you're watching.
Thank you. Well, I am a little bit.
I know.
Thank you very much.
Cindy? Yeah, I just have a quick question. I think I remember after the Holiday Farm fire, when we were taken up there to see the effects, we were told that it would take like 3 years for if there was going to be any significant landslides or anything like that happening. And I know you showed us the map of turbidity. And we're not quite at 3 years post-holiday farm fire, but is it behaving the way we expected it to? Or are we still in that danger zone that there could be significant landslides?
Well, what they say is you generally have like 3 to 5 years is when the roots and everything start to degrade after you have the burning. So you could have that kind of sloughing off. And you saw in one of the pictures, we had a tributary that was still coming out muddy. We did a lot of the erosion control measures and a lot of replanting at the beginning. And they're saying that's one of the best things you can do now is assisting with the replanting for these kind of revegetation efforts. As of this spring, when we're going out now, we are still doing planting and some interplanting. And we're also seeing a lot of native revegetation, regeneration as well, which is fantastic. That means the forest is trying to start to heal itself as well. So those are the best kind of efforts that we can do, and we're continuing to work with landowners, and we're also continuing to try to identify properties that might be strategic to acquire or work with people on doing some of these larger scale restoration projects we've been doing too. That's one of our best things we can do to serve as that kind of sediment buffer to hold back some of that sediment as well.
Thank you.
We also haven't had huge storms in the winter. We haven't had like huge storm events to really challenge it. So I think that there's been a lot of really good growing conditions and pretty mellow winters for plants to grow and not to challenge those kind of debris-torn conditions that we don't want to have.
All right, I'll be quick. Thanks for the report. We have the best water in the world, and I'm so grateful for it, and grateful for the work that this utility does to protect our water quality and the watershed. And I very awkwardly will take off my EWEB board hat and say, you know, during my day job, I work for Lane County and get to work with EWEB staff. And we had a great opportunity where we had state funds to help deal with wastewater treatment. And so we were able to take EWEB's existing no interest loan program and turn it into a grant program in partnership with DEQ to push a whole bunch of dollars upriver to help people repair and replace septic systems. And that program is now operating quickly, just a ton of demand for it. And so we're just seeing a lot of repairs and replacements of old systems. And I just want to say thanks to the team for the work that you all do. And again, just what a remarkable asset, I think, for the utility to have a program that's so proactive and effective. So thank you.
Thank you. One of the questions I had has to do with the drawdown of Cougar and how that affects the turbidity. I mean, they're bringing it down lower than historic, and it sounds like they're going to keep it that low. Do we have a monitoring station at Cougar or right near Cougar for turbidity?
USGS has one right down below from there. Yes.
And then I guess my question is, when we get those flushes out of Cougar, how far down, how far down does that go before it dissipates? I mean, where's our next monitoring? And are we seeing, it's 2 miles worth of muddy water? Is it 5 miles worth of muddy water?
I don't know exactly how long it takes to dissipate. One of the bigger events that we saw for turbidity flushes in the last few years wasn't from the holiday farm fire. It was actually from Blue River Reservoir when the Corps didn't realize that they were drawing down so much because they had an equipment malfunction. But we were able to see that at one of the monitoring stations right downriver. We were able to identify it. Treatment saw it, and they were able to do mitigation measures if they needed to. So we have one of the reasons we have those sonds in and spend all this time and money on those and have this new Aquarius system is because we have a very extensive monitoring network in place that lets us see it as it's coming downriver. So I don't have exact miles for you right now, and the person who can do that analysis is right there. And we also keep an eye on it. So like Mike was saying, if something's bad enough, we can shut down the treatment plant. If they need to, add more to the treatment to do it, I'm not the treatment person, I'm not gonna make up words. They can do that, and they're ready and able to do that, but by the time it gets there, it's normally just a little bit of extra stuff.
And I'm not so much concerned about drinking water. I'm more concerned about a lot of the work that we're doing on habitat restoration up there. If Cougar dumps a bunch of silt and we've done all this work at Finrock Reach, and all of those spawning beds gets filled with silt, we're spending all this money to store the habitat, and then the Corps is dumping in the silt on top of it. That's a concern for me, and I know we talked to the Corps at the council, and it is what it is, but that's one of my concerns.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So just so you know, for some of the large scale restoration work that's occurring South Fork, they already did some of the phases there. There's more phases to come in there. They decommissioned Delta Campground this year. And so they'll be starting, I think it's in 2025, we're going to have more work there. So that would also be a really good project because there's multiple stages for someone like the Corps if they're going to be dumping sediment into the river to fund, because that is a sediment catcher right there.
And then lastly, it looks like, what's that picture? Is that Trail Bridge?
That is the profiler in Blue River Reservoir that should be going out again sometime this month.
Okay, so I guess my question goes to recreational things. What are our time frame for opening up Trail Bridge, Campground, and Smith River Reservoir for recreational?
I don't have that top of my head. Lisa may be able to put it in the chat, or
I do not know that one.
I just want to be the first one into Smith River after 5 years of nobody fishing it.
A few more years, says Lisa.
2 more years?
A few more.
Few more for Smith River, but what about Trail Bridge Campground?
Depend on the license.
We still have another generator to rebuild. So that's next year, not just this year. So it's a couple of years.
And the Trail Bridge Campground is that as well.
Well, yeah, you can't get to it.
Borowski wants the keys, I heard.
When is your term up?
Do you have any more questions for me?
No, thank you. I have the pleasure of sitting on the Mackenzie Watershed Council, and Susan's also on that. So yeah, I'm kind of plugged in as well as Commissioner Brown, and I'm really happy with the work that we do. And I think that we're well received in the Upper Mackenzie Valley as far as partners all along. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you all for supporting the work.
This also mentioned it's dependent on powerhouse improvements that are under construction, so we can provide safe access around construction site.
John.
Oh, one more, yeah.
Quick question. So when the Corps did the drawdown for the cooling tower, every guide and person that lives on the river swore that all the bugs were dead for 3 years, myself included. And they contributed it to DDT out of the base of Cougar Reservoir because of all the silt coming down. Are you concerned about that? Because they're going to draw it down and they're going to have all that silt coming down. And I mean, because bugs don't lie. And the entomologist all said that they all died for a couple of years after, the Corps muddied that river for 2 years. It was a disaster. Are we concerned about that when they dewater it next year?
We do baseline, so we do quarterly monitoring there as well as storm sample monitoring. So it's something we will definitely keep an eye on for that.
So, I mean, they haven't done it yet, and they did it like 10 years ago, but if they do it again, what are we going to do if we detect it?
We test for DDT?
Exactly.
We actually test for DDT?
They're bringing it down.
I know they are. That's my point.
Yeah.
The last time they brought it down to build the cooling tower, it killed all the bugs in the river.
David Donahue in the audience, would you like to add to
I'll
that?
just say, we did provide comment on the environmental impact statement that closed a month and a half ago, and we asked that very question. Because Carl Morgenstern worked with USGS, and they did a bunch of DDT work during that drawdown. So they did see some very low level DDT, but our question was, are they going to be doing any downstream monitoring for DDT? So we'd kind of like to get clarification on that, so we know they're tuned into it. We will certainly also be looking at DDT during that drawdown phase, if it does happen.
Thank you. As long as we're aware of that potential and we can deal with it if it becomes an issue, I appreciate that.
Our source water protection program has amazing staff that are all over all this stuff. So sometimes you just have to give me a minute to answer it, but they probably already are.
Good.
I'd just like to thank the board and the prior leadership and the current leadership here. As you know, I've said before, this is unusual to invest in our source in this way for a utility, and you can see the work that's been year over year, we're keeping an eye on this, we're responding appropriately, we're preventing things, all for the health of our customers. And I want to thank you for that. You brought up some very great points. I want to put in a plug for our second source. That's one of the main reasons why we need a second source, is to deal with, outfalls that we have no control over, because we do not own this watershed, and we rely on our partnerships throughout to accomplish this and make sure that water is safe. And I just flew in this morning from a family trip in Mexico where I had to buy bottled water, brush my teeth and everything else. And it just, refreshes my gratitude for all of the support here and for all the work that our staff does to keep the water safe. So thank you.
I echo that. We went on a trip this last week, and in every other state we visited, my son declared, "This water is terrible. I could never live here." So thank you for all the work. Right.
Yeah, I'd echo that too. Just thank you for the support. I've worked multiple utilities coast to coast and never seen anything close to this level of investment in the source water protection program. So thank you for that.
All right, we will end discussion on the state of the watershed, wonderful state of the watershed, and move on to general manager's annual performance evaluation and merit discussion. Okay. Stay there, Frank.
Yeah, well, this is always the most awkward agenda item of the year, but I was just distracted with "bugs don't lie" as the quote of the evening.
Come on, Frank.
Well, I'm going to just start this off by, saying, well, we've gone through the utilities performance. I think we've had some major successes over the last year in terms of, moving forward with Lieber, headquarters building, various contracts, IBW, all of those are major wins in my book. And, we got to have some of the conversation with Frank about some of this feedback. And I wanted to bring up that, as a, we have our, in our backgrounder, we have information on the competitiveness of the salary range. We took some steps a number of years ago because we were constantly falling behind on keeping up with rate, keeping it as a competitive salary. That change in contract seems to have done a good job year over year. And, we want to make sure that what we're doing, I think we should keep consistent with what the utility does overall. From a perspective of compensation, merit, and what we choose to do. And so I asked Frank what the utility does basically around that. And in terms of merits, in some of the ways that they award merit, it could be in terms of vacation. For a certain number of days, something like 20 to 100 days, it's usually like 1 to 5%. We talked about, we had kind of asked, well, what is, would you like deferred comp? Apparently that is kind of an administrative challenge for, for staff, and for Frank's contract, we'd actually have to change the contract to do deferred comp. So that might be, just more challenged in that regard. So in terms of, consistency and keeping with, how others throughout the utility are either kind of a bonus or something in terms of a merit with, a number of vacation days. And I'll turn it over to Frank to give some more context there.
Yeah, just one slight correction. You said 20 to 100 days. It's actually 20 to 100 hours. I appreciate the 100 days, but just for some. Yeah, just a message to commissioners. I've always felt like the approach to the general manager should be consistent with how we approach compensation for the rest of the organization. There's some differences in scale. There's differences in comparators, and that's understood. Typically, where I am in my compensation versus comparators, we would not typically look at merit adjustments to direct salary, it would typically be in some other form if the board should decide to do that, and that's up to the board. In some cases, as President Carlson mentioned, it could be in the form of a vacation award, it could be in the form of a cash award. But that would be probably either of those would be consistent with what we do with the rest of the organization based on where I'm positioned versus my comparators. So that was just something that was important to me, and I did have a conversation with President Carlson that consistency with the rest of the organization is something that's important to me personally, and I think it's important to the board and the past way that this has been looked at. So, thank you. 200 days so that, or 100 days. I'm already stretching it out.
Thank you. I didn't realize this a date. Thank you. Okay, any comments, thoughts?
I have a thought. So I'm continuing to be impressed with the way you lead this organization and what you've done. You know, I've been through 3 of you, and you're good. And you get what we pay for, so to speak. If we take your salary and adjust it to same average merit that all the other people got, it would be about $8,000. And if we could equate $8,000 into a daily vacation thing, that's just food for thought for others to think about. Be something I would lean into, because that would be on par with what other people are doing on a merit one time and turning it into paid vacation. Just food for thought for others to consider.
Just that I guess I agree. I feel like his performance. Don't always agree with him, but you know, that's not the case, not the issue really. That's the leadership you provide. That is really good. And I had looked at the same number. I think, you know, looking at the average merit and non-represented staff seemed like is for us to target, whether it's vacation or I guess doesn't make it. I guess I'd be inclined to give an option.
I agree. I appreciate your leadership as well. It's a pleasure to work with you. And I would appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm not exactly clear where we're landing, but I think that I agree that the organization has been run well and professionally over the last year. And so in my view, that merits some sort of compensation. What that number or how that we arrive at that, I'll lead into what the board goes forward with it and come forward with that. But yeah, no, I think he's done a good job. Like President Carlson mentioned, we tackled a lot of big things in this last year, and we have some more big things going forward that are coming up. So I think it sends a message to the staff that we value his leadership. I think that trickles down to the rest of the staff. Our confidence in him, because I can't give Rod a raise. But I know that Rod and all the other people that are in this room that work for Frank help get him to that high level of performance. So it's not, I don't look at this as we're giving Frank a raise. I look at it as we're giving the organization a raise, because he's propped up by all these other people. So it's kind of giving kudos to all of them, because that we only employ one person. That person represents the whole. Am I going?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, I just want to say thanks to Lena and Kara for putting this memo together for us for comparison. It makes this much easier. And what makes this harder is that the board members have not had a conversation about what we think is an appropriate merit award for Frank. So this is a super awkward conversation in front of everybody. So just want to call that out. We can't have that conversation beforehand, so it just makes it awkward. My understanding from reading this is that Frank got the cost of living increase that everybody else did. And so what Brown and I are referencing on the very back, the average merit award issued to non-represented EWEB employees is 2.18%. I think that's what you were looking at. So we were talking about a merit of that magnitude.
So would you look for a motion to
Yes.
generalization so we can draft HR? So I'd move that the general manager be given a merit award equivalent to 2.18% of his annual salary, and with the option of taking it either as a lump sum or in accrued vacation based upon his average daily compensation.
Point of clarification, is that a one-time?
One-time.
award? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't affect his base salary.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay. In interest of ending the awkward conversation, let's do a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, Frank. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you, President Carlson and Commissioners. I view this very similarly to Commissioner Borofsky. I'm incredibly blessed to work in this organization and with the people that I do, and that includes the board and includes staff. I think that this is a really classy organization, and I think we think about things in the right way. We're very intentional in what we're trying to accomplish, and I think your leadership is a part of that. And so thank you for that, and really thanks to, and I think I did this in the state of the utility, but really appreciate the efforts and the relationships that we have here and that I have with staff. So with that, there's a lot more work to come. We've got an endless supply of both challenges and opportunities, and look forward to working with you on that in the future and with staff on that. So, thank you.
Okay. With that one under wraps, let's move on to correspondence and agendas.
So President Carlson and Commissioners, I've approached this a little bit differently. As you see on the screen, I've tried to capture what our correspondence represented this month. There were 4 pieces of correspondence, a little bit about the background there. There was really 2 that relate to both our power trading operations, sort of conditions in the market, as well as a compliance report related to our risk management committee, of which there were 6 areas of compliance that we were looking at. We were in compliance on all of those issues. We also, as part of the correspondence, Jason provided some background on really active legislation, where those bills are. In context to that, there was public testimony this evening about a position that was taken on a nuclear related bill. I will provide commissioners with the exact testimony. This was not testimony that we were in favor of building nuclear plants. This was positioned as we should be able to look at options related to non-carbon emitting resources. And that's how it was couched and how it was caveated as well. So this was not, and Jason and I reviewed that before. It was actually written testimony. I can provide the board with that exact testimony so you can have some context on that. Jason provided the other active legislation. And then finally, there was a backgrounder. Also, this is one where we're requesting some feedback from the board on the upcoming DEI board policy work session in April. Really 3 primary components to that document, including a summary on the one-on-one perspectives that each commissioner provided on the topic, some of the approaches and objectives for the April work session in a couple of weeks, And then a highlight of what staff was planning to provide in advance of that meeting for commissioners. And so I think staff was looking for some feedback on that and whether that approach and that content for how we were going to approach that meeting was in line with what commissioners were expecting. So 4 pieces, 3 informational, 1 feedback. And then after this discussion, I wanted to have one more discussion around just correspondence in general. And so I'll save that. And Commissioner, President Carlson, if you wanted to, if any commissioners had any comments or feedback in particular on correspondence item 4, we'd appreciate it.
Okay. All right, and I just pulled up the section on the DEI number 4 as well. So anything on the other items before we jump to number 4?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the hedging correspondence. It's a very complex scenarios. I sat down and went through it with staff last year. Got a little bit of knowledge on it, which is dangerous. But this information was interesting, and I think that we're doing a good job on our hedging. I think that it's going to become more and more complex as the years go on, because we're trying to hedge out to 1, 2, 5 years. We don't know how much rain we're going to get as one of our main drivers of our power to hedge. So this was really good. I just wanted to send kudos out to that staff that are doing that and them know that somebody is reading the report and knowing that they're doing a good job. I know it's way above my pay grade and educational level, but I'm glad there are people that do know what they're doing. So thank you on that.
I guess I similarly would say to Jason, I mean, we get updates on legislative happening in Salem regularly, and it's super helpful to understand, where we're looking and where we're leaning in. And especially right now, there's so much going on in Salem. It's like mind numbing. And so to understand where our priorities are is really helpful. And as Jason has said, and I agree completely, we should be above our weight in Salem. And I think that's a piece of it, is that we're clearly paying attention and weighing in Salem in a way that smaller utilities just. Thanks, Jason.
All right, shall we move to the 4th item here? Looks like there are, from the page here, it says therefore based on so commissioner reviews, the 2 common goals are build a common understanding of the primary goals of DEI policy work and how EWEB and our community would benefit from adopting such a policy. And then number 2, lay out and discuss a roadmap for 2023 of the steps required to develop a DEI policy and ensure shared understanding and commitment to how the milestones will be met. So those were 2 of the items that were the goals for the April work session. And then it looked like down below they had some information on kind of what they would do to work with a DEI consultant. I know that's something that we've all mentioned in the past about working with a consultant around developing, common paths taken by other public agencies, list of consultants, or why we might, why it's actually relevant to EWEB's core mission, examples of policy content, draft guidelines. So those are some of the items that are listed on here. I'm assuming that the consultant work, is that what will take place before the April meeting? So we'll have that information available as context, or is that something that would follow up after the April work session?
Probably gonna be a little both.
Okay.
We engage a consultant this week. So, but there's a pretty short time frame between now and then. That's some of the things.
Okay. Okay, so then how are we going to, from my perspective, how are we going to facilitate the April work session? is there some conversation about, is that, maybe that's not the place where we have the consultant come in. This is just outlining how we want to get there for the April meeting.
We, to coin Frank's joke, you know, we have 5 commissioners and we got 8 or 9 opinions on different things. So, but we do appreciate that. Yeah. One of the differings or thoughts was how to facilitate that. We were not able to get the consultant on board to facilitate that. So we could either stick with Robert's rules kind of format, similar to what we do here, or we could, I've talked to Frank a little bit about this, about MRI facilitation. In part, let you participate a little bit more.
I mean, I'm fine either way. So if others felt like it would be more beneficial to have that, but otherwise I'm happy continuing doing the role in current meeting.
I guess I'm kind of unsure. Well, I want to make sure that everybody can freely participate. And I also know that talking about DEI issues can be a little tricky sometimes because questions come up. It's just a really sensitive, it can be a sensitive subject, and I'm just wondering how we can make sure that everybody can talk about it or ask questions and feel okay about it. I'm not anticipating that there's going to be any weird questions or anything, but it is just a sensitive topic, or it can be, and sometimes it's pretty awkward because we're on TV or just the manner of the way that we meet. So if really like the first meeting is going to be building a common understanding of what the goals are and a roadmap, maybe it's easier to continue to do it in this format. But I guess just going forward, I want to bring that up.
Yeah, and I would echo off of that too. So long as we're developing the goal, but not the nitty gritty of the how, because that's where I've seen other work. You have parameters and kind of a shared understanding of what the rules of engagement are as you're talking about these sorts of topics. And that's not something that we're going to have for this meeting. So, if we're really just focused on kind of the high level, this is kind of what we want to get out of it, but then, and maybe the process we want to go down with consultants, that we don't get into the nitty gritty of, what does this word mean? And how does that affect this policy? And, that sort of understanding. Then I would be fine with that for the April meeting. Ben.
Just a couple of thoughts. One, I appreciate the one-on-one interviews and then this interim report to help us kind of understand where we're aligned and where we're not. It's really helpful for me to next month. I appreciate Minnie's comment and question about, especially the recording part. I hope it's not super awkward, but it's gonna, there's probably gonna be some awkward. There's no requirement that we record and publicize. It has to be open to the public. But we could opt to turn off the cameras and not record that segment of the meeting, and then take minutes instead. I know we've kind of stopped taking minutes, but we could take minutes. But then it's not a recorded version that somebody can take snippets and make us look silly, make me look silly. It's not us, it's me actually. Anyway, that might be one option to do some of the.
Sorry.
Yeah, commissioners, I think I would try to characterize the work session, which can be treated differently. There's no action being taken, so there's notice, quorum requirements and things like that, but there's nothing that drives the same format that we have here this evening. I think I would try to characterize this first meeting in 2 sections. One of them is an educational section to do a little bit of level setting around policy. This is not to tackle the world's approach to DEI, but it's a little bit of, and if you look at the materials being delivered, a lot of it is things that commissioners have asked around, how do other public agencies do it? What's the benefit to an organization to have this kind of policy? So there's some level setting and some information sharing in, so I'll say the first half of the meeting. The second half of the meeting is probably scoping, which is, this is a subject that is very broad and all encompassing, but from a policy perspective, what would the board like see as a good scope and roadmap for particularly the year 2023? And so if you think about that, there's probably ways that we can facilitate it to allow commissioners to feel comfortable in the context of those two pieces of content. I think when we look at this roadmap further and other types of facilitation, there may be some other requirements that come into it. But I think between staff discussions, we can figure out a way to allow commissioners, including President Carlson, to fully participate in the context of those two pieces of agenda item. So if that makes sense to commissioners.
In terms of the scoping process, item 2 on the work that we're doing with consultant, it's really critical to me to have for that meeting. We're not the experts here. Having the consultants that work on this and are moving that forward, what are the options in the scope of work? So we can say, oh yeah, we want this one, but maybe that one doesn't really fit us. But oh, this one does too. So, having the menu of options, I think is valuable. I don't know if we think we'll have that or not, but Kelly?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to that. I think that piece is really important as well, and that came through in the one-on-one interview results with all of you. I think that piece will take a little bit of time to develop, so there'll be information that comes in kind of 2 segments, right? We're anticipating some of that information being available in April that will help us inform the first part of where we think the roadmap could go, but more of that will come by the time we are planning for our next work session in June. So, and Rod, did you have anything you want to add to that?
I've always had a concept that we do things for a reason. And I want to know who's going to tell us what we're not doing now that we need to be doing, and what's the basis for that? Because I want to make sure that this time is well spent. And so I'm going to want, for me, I'm not saying we don't need DEI, but I want to understand who's going to define where we're deficient and why we're deficient in each particular category, and then how we can get better, because we're doing this for a reason. It's not, and hopefully it's not just because a lot of other people are doing it. It's because there's a perception that we're not doing something that we should be doing. And I'd like to know what that is and the basis for that. So we can, at least my position could be a better informed decision. So that's one thing I would like to get out of that work session, because I heard you say the word policies. Hopefully we're not going to get into policies on our first session. Then do a lot of things, and they can create a life of their own. But I kind of want to know, who's going to tell us this, and who's going to give us this definition, and what's the basis for that, so I can understand, better.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm hoping to learn a lot in this one, because I'll put it right out there. I'm uncomfortable setting a DEI policy as a 60-year-old white man, right? Because I've got ingrained bias, I think. I think that's one of the things. So I need to learn. I want to learn as much as I can before I start heading and setting policy for an organization. And so I'm going to be very apprehensive on pushing things forward, just because I'm setting policy, or I'm eventually going to be asked to set policies for individuals that I may not be able to understand where they're coming from. So that's the main thing that I want to learn in these early ones, so that I can help guide a good policy without having the institutional bias that is ingrained from growing up in this society as a white male. That's going to be the hardest part for me, is being able to step back and say, okay, and listening to, hopefully that's where the consultants and stuff can educate us. Because I don't want to come back and somebody say, a bunch of white folks set the policy on equity and inclusion, and they don't know how I feel. So it's a very uncomfortable position that we'll be in, and I can live with that, but I just need to put it out there that that's where I'm coming from. I don't want to be the one that, they pull out a thing out of a minutes and said, Borowski said this. Yeah, that's because that's where I'm at. So the early stages of this, for me, is educational.
I really appreciate that you said that. When I've gone through these kind of trainings before, that is kind of the first step of, here are the different ways that people look at it, and experiences or kind of exercises that they run you through to help, that understanding. I mean, even as a younger female, I've going through that process learned a great deal from it. And I've gone through a number of them, and in each one of them, I've learned more and more about it. So I hope that we all get to benefit from it. And as we go through and do that learning, we understand how the policies that we're affecting, yes, maybe the outcome is that we have a DEI policy that says this is the DEI policy, but that as we set up other policies and make decisions throughout the organization, that we have a better understanding about, oh, wait, I had this blinder on. Okay, I'm going to look at it through this different lens, so that, we get to think about equity in a different way, and get to think about, how these different decisions impact that. And that's why I think this work is so critical for the decision makers in this room, and the, how the staff and managers, and how that builds into the work that they do throughout the whole organization. So I do hope that we get that out of it, and I appreciate that you took that step, because it's not easy and it's not going to be comfortable. But I'm really thankful that we're a group of open individuals that are respectful of one another and can go through this process together.
Thank you for your feedback. I think that everybody starts from a different place with this. The analogy that I might use is if you look at something like a triple bottom line decision process, it doesn't necessarily dictate the answer. It dictates the approach and the process. And I think in many ways, when we think about our strategic plan and our definition of values, it's not what we do, but how we do it that is also part of that consideration. I do appreciate the fact that we need to understand the organizational benefit and the standards of which we're striving for. Those are important to identify areas of opportunity for the organization, to make sure that we are evaluating decisions appropriately. And so I think a big part of this is to educate the board on, what does what does a good policy look like, and what are the components of it, and how does it fit within an organization like EWEB's. And I think a lot of the sort of materials start to provide some samples and examples of that. And so I think we'll go into this with that in mind, that we want to find ways to develop how we're going to approach these types of issues. And there's going to be a little bit of education up front, a little bit of level setting, a little bit of understanding of how this is applied and affects organizations. And out of that, there's going to come some gaps that we need to look at and fill. And so it's going to be a little bit of a process, but I think that commissioners are coming toward it from a good place. So we got some feedback here this evening. We're going to have to digest that and sort of unpack that a little bit and figure out how we make April 18th productive and informative. And we'll huddle up tomorrow morning and figure out what that looks like and be back.
All right.
Thank you. President Carlson wanted to make one proposal. I know you and I talked about this a little bit relative to the sequence of correspondence in the board meetings themselves. A lot of correspondence, staff hangs around to the end of the meeting, waiting for potential questions and interactions. And in many of our meetings, we get to this point, and it's like, let's get done and get out of here. Great, there's 15 pieces of correspondence. Yep, okay, when we're gone. A proposal for the board's consideration, especially president, vice president who set agendas, would be to potentially add this on to the very beginning as an item from general manager. The benefit to staff is that if there's issues, those issues are up front. These are generally pretty quick type of items. So I wouldn't see that cutting into the timing around public input, but I would just like to get some feedback or, get your direction on that.
So Grandpa here, when I first started this board, all the consent calendar items were the very last thing. And before staff had to sit there with, babysitters and no meals and everything for 4 and 5 hours till 10, 11 o'clock at night. And then he wouldn't get asked a question. It was the most ridiculous thing in the world. We changed it and for the better. And so I would wholeheartedly support that because it's not fair these people have lives too. And if they have to have input, that's great. Well, let's get it up front and let's not waste a very, very valuable asset and that's their time. And so I'm all for it.
I agree, and we're also we don't really have anything at the beginning and we get to public input before it's published time anyway, so it's not like, I don't even think it would affect that at all.
Great. Looks like we're all in agreement, yeah.
Favorable.
Let's not waste people's time. Okay. Anything on board agendas?
We've added a few things. Those are typically noted up front in the board agendas. A couple of examples would include, I think we placed the hydrogen discussion in June, I believe. Part of that scheduling, we're pulling in some expertise from the Renewable Northwest Hydrogen Alliance to help with that discussion. And so a few things like that are finding their place. Also, we've put the contents down for the Upriver Board meeting. We'd like to kind of start moving out on some of that content. And so commissioners, I think we've had some informal discussions, some of it individually, but a lot of that meeting will be to facilitate the interaction with those. And we got some feedback directly from Commissioner Schlossberg on that. So anyway, that content has been added. And so any feedback that you have relative to that would be important. One final note, I will actually be in Washington, D.C. that first week in May. And so I will remote in. So Rod Price will be sitting in the calm. I don't know how they refer to that, but on. I won't miss the meeting. I have not missed a meeting in I don't know how many years, actually, but so I'll still be in attendance. I just will be remote in May.
Make sure the meeting runs till midnight that night.
Thanks. Jeez.
Yeah, I'm in Washington.
I just have a comment on agendas that I will not be here for the June 20th work session. I'd be here for the July 5th.
We're going to have a board meeting on July 5th because historically we moved it around because some people are coming off of the July 4th weekend. I don't even know what it is, but I know that we've moved meetings before to accommodate. Yeah, I mean, that's just something for you guys to think about.
June 20th is tough for me as well. That's graduation night.
Kind of a busy night.
Kind of a busy night in the university area. It's the busiest of the year, so.
We'll take a look at some scheduling options for June work session, and then I'll leave it up really, I guess, to you, President Carlson and Vice President Borowski, on if July 5th is still appropriate. We've done both in the past. We've gone ahead with the Tuesday after a long weekend, and sometimes we have pushed it out. Sometimes a week, sometimes a day.
July 5th is a Wednesday. July 4th.
Oh,
is
that's-
actually the Tuesday.
So that's before that, so.
Is would you do then July 11th, or would it be the 18th? If we moved it.
We have moved it out a week in the past. If commissioners have all agreed to that, we could facilitate that.
18th is bad for me. Or the 11th, if possible.
If you want to table that, and we can reach out.
Okay.
The challenges of scheduling this board's time gets pretty complicated, other than the first Tuesday of the month. Yes.
Okay. Goodness, next, board wrap up. Matt?
I just have one item just to reflect on the consent calendar items that we get. I just so appreciate how detailed they are. And every time I go to have a question, I look, and somewhere in that memo is the answer to the question I have about what we're about to purchase or contract for. So I know we don't talk about these very much, but I really appreciate the effort that goes into them. And I'm so excited we're getting a 60-foot digger ditch. Derek, sorry, digger Derek. It's very exciting. And we're getting a discount on it. Buying it used. That's all. Thanks.
I used to have, I don't know, 15 or 20 questions every packet. Now I feel like I don't have as many because all the consent calendar information is right there. So I do appreciate it.
Just a final thought. We used to plot the number of questions that we were really striving to continuously improve that and get it go down. So I'm glad to hear that feedback.
Got your raise.
I probably watch out for next month.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not, oh. Ross.
I guess I'll just wrap up by saying, bugs don't lie.
With that,
Bugs don't lie.
bugs don't lie. Okay, you wait. I'm that.
No, I think that's the,
They don't. Like they're in the coal mine.
We've reached delirium phase. I think we're done. All right. Meeting adjourned.
no, I like it.
I like it too.